Call our meeting to order. This is the Town of Pittsburgh Board of Commissioners regular meeting for Monday, July 25th, 2016. And as is our custom, we'll open with a moment of silence. May we each do all we can to keep our town and county peaceful and welcoming. Thank you. You have your agenda before you. Is there a motion to approve the agenda or to add or subtract items from the agenda?
We need to pledge allegiance.
I am so sorry. Jay Farrell has reminded me that we need to pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Now we have the agenda before us. And is there any adjustments to be made to that agenda? Any additions, subtractions?
Yes, I would like to add one new item to make it item number 3, and that has to do with funding opportunities through the NCDOT for accessibility issues in towns less than 5,000 population.
Number 3 under new business.
Yes.
You've heard the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, the motion carries unanimously. We have before us a consent agenda with 4 items, including minutes, resolutions regarding travel, installment financing, and sewer inflow and infiltration contract. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Before we do that, may I make a change to the minutes? I apologize if I was not clear in our last meeting. Under Commissioner Concerns, Ms. Alice, you have me saying that I asked Manager Grusbeck for some additional analysis to ensure that the debt we're accruing for the force main line, or we might accrue for the force main line, would still have us under our 8% limit. And I just wanted to make sure that I was clear, if I may, my concern is that debt not prevent us from taking on additional debt for a project such as a new town hall or other unforeseeable large capital expenditures.
Did you recommend some rewording, John?
I apologize that I didn't do that in advance, but
What page are you on?
final page 23 of our minutes from last meeting.
Would the board be comfortable with John working with Alice to revise that particular paragraph that starts Commissioner Bonnet's and ends with LGC? Is that the paragraph that you're concerned about? Is the board comfortable with that?
Thank you, Francis.
Other than the work that lays before Alice and John Bonnet, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved. Second.
Moved by Michael Fiocco, seconded by Jay Farrell. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Passes unanimously. We're now at the portion of the meeting in which we hear citizen matters. Public expression speakers. Liz Cullington is the only person signed up tonight. Liz intends to speak on the Chatham Park additional elements. Generally, we do not allow speakers on aspects of things that are on the agenda, but this is an informational matter on the agenda. does the board have a feeling about hearing from Liz Cullington regarding this particular matter, even though it is in some fashion on the agenda? Right. We are not voting on things. Thank you, Liz.
Thank you. I'll try to be very brief. I have actually only started working my way through the additional elements, and I hope to get some comments into you when I figured out how it all interrelates. But that's one of the things I wanted to mention tonight, just in case I get hit by a truck, that number one, the additional elements, and someone may have stated this before, but it's not a series of separate pieces. They're all interrelated and need to be looked at together when they're looked at. Number two, the additional elements revise the master plan and anticipate, I believe, the development agreement or some aspects of it. And I also was very alarmed to find that, as almost sort of a throwaway in there, it says that contrary to my understanding at the master plan stage, Chatham Park would not be covered by any future ordinances or the So anyway, so my bottom line, at this point, having only read, like a sixth of the way through, is if possible, I would encourage a rather broader use of consultants rather than the sort of just piecemeal having a certain kind of consultant just look at a specific section with their area of expertise. I would encourage you to read it really, really carefully. And presumably there will be additional opportunities for members of the public to weigh in. But anyway, I just was a little bit surprised that the additional elements were not at all what I was expecting, but something a little bit different. So anyway, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And wear your seatbelt, Liz. The next item on the agenda is mayoral updates. Because we didn't have our meeting first part of July, I've been to just a covey of things, but I wanted to report that cut the ribbon at the Belmont Affordable Housing Project on the 11th of July, attended the Economic Development Commission meeting the next day, and conducted a meeting that some of you all attended, which was a community meeting talking about peace and safety in the community, which I think was very well received, and was followed by a meeting which was brought forth by the faith community addressing the same subjects of safety and peace, and that was this past week. Also attended a Habitat community meeting. They are doing a series of neighborhood meetings in the Timber Loop area, and I think that Jeff Jones and Paul Horn spoke at that meeting as well as I brought some general greetings from the town of Pittsburgh. So those are the kinds of things that I attended this past week. This past couple of weeks? Are there any commissioners' meetings that were attended, Triangle J or Climate, PBA? Anything? A lot of meetings are off for the summer, so that might be.
The Chatham County Climate Change Advisory Committee did meet, and it was a very good meeting. Amanda Robertson and John Graybeal reported on an effort to deliver comments to Chatham County as regards the current land use planning process. And it's a very important consideration as we think how we're going to grow the county in future. And so rather than trying to encapsulate or summarize those comments, I would just encourage folks who are particularly concerned or interested in land use planning and the impacts, positive or negative, on climate change. I would encourage folks to look at the website, and I believe that is posted. Amanda, is that your understanding?
Yes, the recommendation should be up there at this point.
And also, Amanda gave a report independent of the Climate Change Advisory Committee.
Actually, it was on behalf of...
Oh, it was on behalf of the committee to the commissioners regarding a notion of natural capital. And that is a way to use the lens of economics to understand the costs and benefits of our impacts on the planet, and what we can do to mitigate that and to improve that. How we can, by understanding the way we influence our environment, how that affects our pocketbook individually and as society in the future. She gave that presentation to the county commissioners, and she reported that it was met with great interest. And I would like to encourage us to consider asking Amanda Robertson to deliver the same presentation so that we can better understand how economics can be used to ensure that we're preparing a good, strong environment for future generations. So I suppose that I could bring that up now or during commissioner concerns, or...
Out of the interest of the board, would I like to hear from Amanda? And if so, Amanda, can you give me an idea of the length of your presentation so we could appropriately plan for it?
Take 20 minutes.
20 minutes.
I don't know if you should probably set that on the schedule.
Yeah.
On the agenda.
Not necessarily the next meeting.
Yeah, not today.
If there's an interest in it, I'd like for us to schedule that.
I will not be here the next meeting. I'm interested in seeing it, so maybe if we can, that's okay to put it off.
Late August?
Will you be here at the second meeting in August?
How's that?
Maybe the agenda will be a little bit lighter at that point.
I like
Maybe.
Brian's humorous response.
Yes, indeed. Let's look at the agenda for that second meeting in August then. Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you.
I'll just mention the PBA wanted to be here. They thought that they would attend and give us all thanks for support of the Summer Fest, but of course we did not have a meeting 2 weeks ago, and we turned around and left. But Greg and Maria, who were really instrumental in leading the organization, sent me a letter and asked that I read this out this evening. It's longer than I anticipated, but I'll do that. And it says, Dear Mayor Perry and the Pittsboro Board of Commissioners, on behalf of the Pittsboro Business Association, I would like to thank you for your vote of confidence in and the financial support of the first annual Pittsboro Summerfest. As you may have heard, Summerfest was, by all accounts, a huge success and widely attended. While there's no way to accurately count the number of people who attended, the general consensus is over 2,000 attendees. With the support of the town and cooperation of Town Manager Brian Grusbeck, Police Chief Percy Crutchfield, and John Petit and their staff, we were able to hold an event that brought new visitors to our town and an increase in business sales. The BBA has received a number of letters from downtown businesses sharing with us the record number of visitors to their establishments, some shops showing record sales. In addition, this event created an opportunity for local schools and nonprofits to raise over $1,000 for their causes. The one commonly heard comment that pleases me the most is that this was a community event. The town and its businesses and local property owners came together in the spirit of cooperation, and citizens came out to enjoy some of the best of what we have to offer. It is my hope that in the future we can make further efforts to effectively reach out to more businesses, groups, and citizens so that we may truly say this is our town event. Created and intended for us all, we invite folks from all over to see what Pittsboro is all about. This event was not just about business, it was about coming together, sharing and celebration. It is also my hope that we continue in this vein, creating events and an environment that holds downtown Pittsboro's place as the heart of the community. With much appreciation, Maria Parker Lewis, Chairperson, PBA Summerfest Committee.
Very nice letter.
Yeah.
I just read up in the internet too, over it.
Yeah. The other meeting I would mention is had a Main Street presentation from Fred and his group designing the rain garden in the northwest corner. And there was some good feedback, and the Main Street Design Subcommittee is going to work with that plan and the Kinley Horn plan for the circle to try to make recommendations on materials and items of mutual interest throughout the town, and see if we can contribute to a successful project there by integrating both of these plans.
Very good. Any other meetings we need to report on? I would note that we are continuing to have Monday with the mayor, office hours from 10 to 2 each Monday, and it's been a very pleasant experience to be available to meet with concerned citizens. So people are welcome to that with no appointment, just drop in. Next item on the agenda then is public hearing on a rezoning request at Russet Run. Is there a motion to go into public hearing?
So moved.
Moved by Michael Fiocco.
Second.
Seconded by Jay Farrell. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It passes unanimously. And Jeff Jones, we would look to you to initiate the public hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Tonight we have rezoning REZ 2016-05 along Russet Run. Its property owners are last name are Chrisman and Malott. Consists of 5 lots at the end of Russet Run. There's the location map. The request is to go from RA2, turn this thing on, RA2 to R10 zoning, so from 2-acre minimum lot size to 10,000 square foot lot size. The future land use plan indicates that this area, sort of east of Russet Run, at the end of Russet Run, to be considered medium density residential. Medium density residential would be consistent with R10 to R12 type development. The land use plan indicates that medium density residential would be something akin to Chatham Forest and those types of lot design and street network. There's the current zoning plan. You can see that the property is, most of the property is surrounded by Chatham Park PDD, which is that area in brown, and the remaining parts of the area is RA2. The request is to again rezone that 190 plus acres of land to R10, which would be 10,000 square foot lot sizes. I can answer any questions that the board may have. I know the applicant is here, and I do believe there's some folks who have probably signed up to speak at the public hearing.
Yes, indeed. The public hearing sign-up sheet has 5 names. Would the board like to hear from them now, or are there questions for the town?
Or hear from the applicant.
Hear from the developer?
Yeah. Okay. Patrick.
Madam Mayor and Commissioners, my name is Patrick Bradshaw. I practice law in Pittsboro, and I represent the property owners Calvin Malott and Rocky and Janie Chrisman in these requests to rezone their property in the ETJ. Mr. Malott acquired all of this property in 1968. Mr. Chrisman's father acquired his portion from Mr. Malott in 1971. So these applicants and property owners have owned this property for almost 50 years, 48 years. These requests to rezone from RA2 to R10 are necessary to carry out the goals of the town's land use plan adopted in 2012. The land use plan designates this property for medium-density residential development. The R10 district is defined in the zoning ordinance as medium to high-density residential areas. It has been asserted in materials included in your agenda packet that these rezonings would allow 1,900 homes on these properties. The R10 district has a minimum lot area of 10,000 square feet. On 190.5 acres, the very maximum number of lots, if you could get every single lot that could possibly be allowed, would be 829, nowhere near 1,900. The R10 district does not permit a number of commercial uses that would be allowed under the existing RA2 zone, which is consistent also with the land use plan, targeting this area for residential use with some limited institutional uses such as churches, schools, neighborhood facilities, but not commercial uses like agriculture, warehousing, antique and gift stores, veterinary establishments, and so on, all of which would be allowed in the R2 district as either permitted or special uses. The town's draft Unified Development Ordinance, which has not yet been adopted, proposes to combine the existing R12 and R10 zoning districts with a minimum lot area of 10,000 square feet, which is the standard for the current R10 district. Although the UDO has not been adopted and has no controlling authority, at the very least it shows the current best thinking of the town's consultants who are knowledgeable and experienced in this area about what zoning standards are appropriate for medium density development, and it is consistent with this request. I would also point out that the land use plan does not designate any areas for high density development, and only 18% of the town's total planning area is designated for medium density. The areas identified in the land use plan for rural and low density development make up a combined 54% of the town's planning area. If the town is to fulfill the goal of the land use plan to create a mix of housing types and to balance the mix of housing types to provide housing opportunities for all members of the community, regardless of age, income, and background, it is vital to hold on to these limited areas that are targeted for medium density and allow them to actually be developed at medium densities. Finally, the character of the area surrounding these properties has changed to such an extent that the existing rural, very low density, residential and agricultural zoning designation is no longer appropriate. The property is adjoined on the west and the south by a portion of the Chatham Park Planned Development District that is designated for mixed uses and has allocated to it 917 dwelling units and 3,889,500 square feet of non-residential uses, which will allow residential development and many other commercial, institutional, and recreational uses. On the east, the property is adjacent to a residential section of Chatham Park, slated for 1,565 dwelling units on 391.2 acres, or about 4 units per acre, which is very consistent with the R10 zoning that is being requested for these properties. Because of these changed and changing circumstances, and to promote and fulfill the goals of the land use plan, we respectfully request that you allow these proposed rezonings. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Patrick Bradshaw. Are there any questions? If not, then we will proceed to members of the public.
I'd just like to make a request that maybe the board to get a copy of what you just read.
Yes, please.
Yes.
I'd be happy to email that to you.
Thank you. Dr. Kelly? The first person signed up.
Hi, my name's Duckett Kelly. I live at 735 Russet Run, which adjoins this piece of property that we're discussing. So on the north side of this piece of property is Northwood Subdivision, which is owned by private landowners who've been there a number of years, myself being one of them for 18 years. So I guess we forgot to put in what's bordered on that side. And we have a nice rural little neighborhood there and have had for quite some years a nice area there. When I moved there 18 years ago, there was no bypass. 15501 and 64 were both one lane in each direction. Like everybody else in my neighborhood of, I think, 14 or 16 homes in there. We've been living the life. It's been a really wonderful little piece of heaven and kind of a funny place because most people haven't even realized that that quaint little spot existed. So it's been a lovely little place to live. I turned my little piece of land into my little horse farm. I've built a barn. I've got outbuildings. I finally have a new house after a tree fell on the double wide 4 years ago. You know, it's not all been easy, but it's been fun. And we and all the neighbors have really enjoyed it. And the Christmans as well. And they've always been really good neighbors. You know, there's never been anything but a neighborly relationship. And Mr. Malott, I don't think I've even met him before, but, you know, it's always been a very safe, friendly neighborhood. But the proposal to change it 190 acres from RA2 to RA10 is really upsetting the lifestyle that we've been enjoying and I believe entitled to as long as we've lived there. You know, it could go from 95 homes to 1,900 residences. I hear now 825, but it seems like 1,900 is what they're saying that it could go to. So that kind of high density in Chatham County, it just seems really beyond comprehension to me to have that in my backyard, outside of the very obvious of the negative impact of that kind of density on the environment, the air quality, the climate, the watershed. It's right uphill from the Haw River. And the existing homes, we all have wells there. That kind of construction going on, I feel like our wells are really going to be in jeopardy of continuing to have good, safe water to drink. I myself have a really personal interest in this because when you take a look at the map, you see the access way that this land gets to from 15501. It has an access easement across my piece of property. So they're the dominant piece of property and I am the servient. And I believe that for them to have this sort of an increase in the land use will constitute what's called an unreasonable burden on the servient land. To have the construction vehicles going across my land right next to my home, for the deforestation of 190 acres, and then all of the construction vehicles going across there in order to build this, let alone, say, 3,600 people a day driving past my yard in their cars, I believe is really an unreasonable burden on my land. The road, which is only a one-lane gravel road. This is not a big road. This is, a lot of people would call this a driveway. The main access to my road is actually a dirt road. So it's a dirt road onto a little bit of a gravel road. So it goes from worse to better, I suppose. And that dirt road during the wintertime, we've had ruts that go about 12 inches deep already in the wintertime. So the idea of, you know, deforesting 190 acres, and though a few years ago Mr. Malott did do a select cut of that land, and there were a lot of days that those trucks couldn't get in and out, and there were a lot of days that the ruts were getting deeper and deeper and deeper. As a result of it, they had to do a lot of work on it. So I just think that that's really overburdening that road also, and that is also an easement access, so I think it's an overburden to that easement access. And I realize that, you know, it really isn't the Christmans and Mr. Malat are wanting to rezone this land, but it's really for Chatham Park. And it just seems like they have so much land, they have so many homes planned. When is enough enough? Can't they, 4,000 more people? Do we really need that? I myself do not treat Chatham County as a bedroom community. I live in Chatham County. I work in Chatham County. I shop in Chatham County. I play in Chatham County. This is my home. And so, please, I'm really begging you to not pass this rezoning, to not consider putting this sort of unreasonable burden on my land and my home and my life. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kelly. Next person signed up is Amanda Robertson. We do technically have a 3-minute limit for the public speakers. We're going to be a little bit flexible with that this evening.
I think we all got it. Hard copy.
All right, thank you. Well, I timed this, Mayor, so I'm hoping it'll be right around 3 minutes. Maybe a couple of seconds longer, we'll see. So Mayor Perry, Commissioners, thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. My name's Amanda Robertson. I live at 244 Prince Creek here in Pittsboro. About 2 years ago, Pittsboro Commissioners voted to approve rezoning for the largest master plan development in the history of North Carolina. This rezoning approval now allows a density on par with some of the largest cities in the United States, property that includes thousands of acres of forests and fragile ecosystems adjacent to one of the most endangered rivers in the country and an already dangerously polluted lake where a state government already turns their head the other way. Today we are here again to give the people a chance to speak and request of you to stay your hand in approving this rezoning application. You've already approved unprecedented development when none of us could afford to do so, when civilization could not afford for you to do so. Certainly the vast majority of Pittsboro citizens did not want you to do so. Yet I do understand why you did so. Our current model of economic growth relies on taking from nature, and your job is to ensure first and foremost the economic growth of this community. And nature provides everything, from the gasoline in our cars, the metals used to make our cars, to the soil for farming and the timber and stone for building, our clothing, TVs, furniture, and appliances, as well as land for houses and shopping centers and apartment complexes. But it also provides for the air that we breathe, the water that we drink, the food that we eat. We take and have been taking from nature to such an extent that the balance nature provides that sustains us and all life around us is no longer in balance. Nature is so depleted it cannot compensate for all the pollutants the many billions of us have been expending into the air, water, and land of this planet. And it is dying. Think about it. We had a population of 1.8 billion just a century ago. Today we have about 7.4 billion and growing. For all of these people to participate in our current methods of economic growth, taking from nature's resources for personal material gain with no consideration of the impacts, nature, of course, will run dry. And it has. We must begin a process of setting a value, a monetary value, on nature and nature's services as it sits. Services like fresh water, fertile soil, clean air, game, and fish. Such an approach will not be easy. It will mean rethinking the ways we currently approach planning in our communities. But we are not alone. There are already many governments around the world implementing these principles of land management into policymaking. Many countries, including our own. We have already gone the route of changing the zoning of thousands of wooded acres where much more limited development was previously possible. We will all have to live with this decision, as will our children, and the impacts it will have on our community, our state, and our planet. But today, I'm asking you to stay your hand on this application. Do not grant this rezoning. Instead, begin a process where decisions consider the full costs and benefits of a proposed use of an ecosystem, rather than just the monetary results of nature's products that enter our markets. And I honestly believe that the attorney representing the applicant this evening supported this argument. We have enough development of this nature already, and I think we need to give pause and think about what natural capital we have left and take time to analyze this. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda Robertson. Next person signed up is Mike Watkins.
Good evening. Mike Watkins, 400 Prince Creek. Sometimes it's depressing to be proved right, when something you warned about actually becomes a reality. Chatham Park's vaunted claim of high-density, mixed-use, walkable communities being the antithesis of urban sprawl seems to have been sadly dispelled. Barely a building complete before this new, substantial rezoning request for yet another large development. That said, I suspect this is by no means the first of such requests, one or more of which may already have been approved. This stable door could bolt itself open and you probably wouldn't be able to close it. It's also disturbing to note that the planning department is already recommending approval before this public hearing has been concluded. Isn't that the wrong way round? Don't they need to hear from adjacent owners or from concerned citizens before they make these recommendations? Of course, ETJ residents were utterly ignored by the town on the Chatham Park issue, but I trust that's not becoming policy. How can the town assess the impacts of this potentially large development without requiring environmental, economic, or traffic assessments? Unfortunately, since we refuse to demand these very assessments from CPI, any impact analysis for any future surrounding development could be virtually worthless without the King Kong-sized gorilla in the room stepping up to do its part. I'm personally concerned about this rezoning because, while it lies exactly 1 mile from my own property, there is only one property owner between me and it, Chatham Park. A residential development of this size would leave almost nothing but concrete between me and the Haw River. Actually, more precisely between me and Dr. Kelly. A residential of this size, as I say, would leave nothing but concrete between the Haw River. 90% of it is at a higher elevation than mine. Imagine the runoff potential. I don't actually have to imagine it, since just the Chatham Parkway Bridge was started, the stormwater erosion of my woodlands has already been substantial. I can't blame these property owners, especially if they are residents, for jumping on this bandwagon. If they came to Chatham County for the same reasons I did, peace and security in tranquil, natural surroundings, hanging around will be a living nightmare. I'd probably go myself. I'll give the commissioners a moment to savour that thought. But I'm probably too old and too poor to start over anyway. While I don't really need another thing to get depressed about, the character of Chatham County seems already fraying at the edges. With the floodgates of sprawl opening, I can't imagine kids for a minute. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike Watkins. The last person to stand up is Diana Delsmer.
Hi, I'm Diana Delsmer, and I bought this land that we're talking about. I live on 60 Haven Road. I don't have anything prepared, but what I do want to say is these last speakers have voiced my concerns more eloquently than I ever could. And it just seems that this is such a big jump from 2 acres to this density that we're talking about. And everything that everybody has already spoken about is the concerns that I have. So I just wanted to add that.
Thank you very much.
I believe that there's someone who did not sign up that would like to speak. Would the board like to hear from a citizen? Yes. Gentlemen, if you'll come up and give us your name and address, please. Yes. Please come to the microphone.
My name is Robert Parks, and have property at the end of Russet Run on the Country Route Road, which dead ends at the very end of Russet Road. And I have 10.2 acres there that I bought with great hopes of building there in the future, and I bought it in 1994. I will say this about the development and the future outlook for that area. And I'm all for it as far as it's done constructively and responsibly. To try to hold it in as a central area of a central park, or you want to call it a preserve, you might as well forget it, because the inevitable is going to happen. People are coming into this area, and why? Because they want to. They're coming here not because they're forced to. It's a desirable place to live. And I think growth is good. It's good for the county. I grew up in Chatham County and lived here all my life. And I remember then when I went to school in 1957, we hardly had enough chalk to pass around and mark on chalkboards. So development and growth is good. It's good for the county. It's good for the people. I have 10.2 acres there. If the land is approved to be more development, that's fine, as long as it's done in accordance of the law and responsibility. And I think for us to look at trying to reserve an area this proximity to Pittsboro, you have a new bridge coming in, you have access, they talk about traffic and they're throwing up all the negatives. I think there's a lot more positives than there are negatives. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yes, Jay.
I can answer any questions. If not, the recommendation's on the screen.
Does the board have questions? If what would occur here is directing this to the planning board at their next meeting. Is that correct?
That's correct. Next Monday night, they will have this for their recommendation to the board.
Yeah, I think I've got a question probably for the applicants, who had mentioned that the land use plan indicated this was designated for medium to high density. I think I'm only finding that it's recommended for medium density.
Two different things. You're correct. The land use plan does designate this area for medium density development.
Okay.
When I said medium to high, I was quoting from the description in the zoning ordinance of the R10 district.
Got it.
So the zoning ordinance says the R10 district is appropriate for medium to high density development.
Okay, because I think in our documentation it puts labels on the zoning districts and indicates that R10 is high density,
That is
and R12 is medium density.
That is the title of it in the zoning ordinance. That's correct. But if you read the first sentence of the description, it says medium to high.
Medium to high
is represented by R10.
Okay.
So it's an unfortunate label from my perspective, but the text of the section is supported. And then that feeds into the further point I was making, that in the draft UDO, and you all may change this obviously, you may not adopt the draft UDO, but the proposal from your consultants is to combine the R10 and R12 districts into a single medium density development district. And they use the 10,000 square foot minimum lot size as the standard for that medium density district.
Okay. Thank you.
Are there further questions from the board?
Yeah, I'll just take a moment to educate the board and others as to the recommendation from staff and where that comes from. The recommendation is strictly a technical recommendation from the approved plans of this town, and that is the future land use plan. that was adopted in 2012, and that area was designated as medium density. R10 is a zoning district that is from medium to high density residential. That's why in my recommendation I do have a however in there, that once development is submitted to the town, analysis will need to be done to make sure that that is in fact a medium density type of development. R10 and R12 currently allow for townhomes and things like that, which might make a development not look or appear or even be in fact medium density. Thus the however in the staff recommendation. That's where staff's recommendation comes from, is from the adopted plans of the town. It is not for me to be able to hear from the public and analyze that. That is for you all to hear and for the planning board to be able to hear. It is for me to report to this board and other boards as to what are the adopted plans of this town. And that is what we have.
And Jeff, just to clarify, regardless of the type of dwelling unit, whether it be single family or multifamily, the zoning designation is going to limit the number of those units by the process of dividing the overall acreage by that unit, whether it's 10,000 or 12,000.
That's right.
Further questions?
I'm assuming that that at the time the small area plans are submitted is when they would, the UDO is done at that time, and whatever orders are in place when they submit the small area plans. Is that correct?
There wouldn't necessarily be a small area plan for a development of this. It could be a subdivision plan for the 190 acres that would come to you.
Right, but a plan.
Yes, a development plan or a subdivision plan would be submitted, and it would be subject to whatever regulations we have at the time. Either it's the zoning and all the ordinances that we have now, or future UDOs that might be approved by the town.
Mr. Jones, your tenure has been fairly brief so far, but I'm curious if you have any knowledge about precedents regarding this size of rezoning.
I think each community has different perspectives on rezoning requests of varying sizes. In my experience, it was not uncommon to have rezonings of this size.
In Holly Springs?
Yes, in Holly Springs. That would lead to future development of residential subdivisions and or commercial subdivisions. That was, and all those rezonings were in fact, again, as the land use plan was adopted for the most part. There were some times where the applicant would have to amend the land use plan and go through the rezoning, but there was public hearings for both, and they would go through that process. But generally, a town's adopted land use plan is the guiding principles for future development and future requests before the town. That's been my experience in here, Holly Springs, Fuquay, wherever I've worked in the past. And there could be other mechanisms that we want to look at in the UDO there's things in the UDO for public involvement earlier in requests for future development, where there's community meetings and outside of this room that would be held by the developer and the community. And staff would be involved in that as a reporting function. So there are ways that we're thinking about improving communication with developers and the community. I'm not sure that that's actually going to change some sentiment that we have tonight and people's beliefs that development may not be good for their community. But it could be a way to better inform folks of what's happening in their area.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Well, being fairly new to the community and to the board, I'd like to ask the question of my fellow board members. Does anyone recall a similarly sized rezoning other than Chatham Park in recent memory? 190 acres.
I would say, I would just assume it'd probably be somewhere in the neighborhood of Chatham Forest over here would be the last, but that's been 15 years, way long.
Probably the largest. Yeah, right.
Yes, Chatham Forest and Copper.
Several mixed-use plan developments that are on that size.
Several mixed-use
Plan developments represented.
Then you've got Hearthstone. That's fairly recent. So those are the main ones.
Those are all rezoning.
I'm sure that because Hearthstone, that was actually farm, as you know, that was farmland.
I have a couple more questions, if I may, Mr. Jones. Do we have a means of estimating how population might increase with these parcels?
One could take the latest average household size in Pittsburgh and do a simple calculation of what that density yield would take you out, and it's around the 800 units or so. And then if you go 3 persons, I don't know what the need. I'm just sort of hypothetically 3 from that. I think, what are you looking at? 2,400 folks could be added for this parcel.
You have further questions, John, about it?
Yes. In your analysis, Jeff, which was very helpful, thank you, a similar statement you made regarding transportation, that this development will change the transportation patterns in the area. Is it at the subdivision stage that we would then scrutinize transportation impacts?
We would see, at a minimum, say it was a sort of a master plan site, you would see collector roads and any major thoroughfares. It's close to an area. Go back. The eastern portion of this site, of this parcel, is close to a future parkway designated land area for. That's on our thoroughfare plan. So it could be that shifts.
Eastern edge, you say?
Eastern edge, yes.
So it might not go out Russet Run.
It may
bulk
not.
of the traffic may not go out that direction.
It may not. And once we have small area plans and subdivision plans for Chatham Park, there will be interconnectivity through that development that will lead into this 190 acres that will bring future development on those through that interconnectivity. Russet Run may not be the main avenue to get to this area.
So the mention in your analysis of Chatham Forest in particular struck a bell for me, because that's where I live, and we do have, we enjoy interconnectivity. After a lot of wrangling, Springdale Court connects, and then there's the main Chatham Forest Drive. Those are vehicular interconnections, but we also have foot trails, and those are, I think, all informal. But it's a luxury to be able to walk to the grocery store, And so as I'm thinking about this rezoning, I am thinking about that size of a project as entirely residential, and I am pondering the character of what Chatham Park is describing as mixed use, live, work, play, and wondering how that fits in. And I'm just trying, forgive me for going on a bit here, but I don't have a question at the end, but I just would like to be straightforward with everyone that I think that there's some things we need to grapple with here. And I'm almost wishing that we had the small area plans from Chatham Park before this applicant came in. Here's a question. I have heard it alleged that this is a rezoning prior to a transfer of property to Chatham Park. Do you have any indication of that as being true or rumor?
It would be rumor, and I wouldn't want to perpetuate.
I understand. That is something that I would like to ask and to continue to understand better.
Yeah, I think sort of thinking about the small area plans, there are holes or adjacent properties that we will need to ensure that there are connections to those adjacent properties, that if they were developed in the future, that there are road connections, that there are pedestrian greenway connections. That's why it's important for the town to also have its own plans of greenways and open space and how those connect. The town's going to go through their own process to do that. And when we have the small area plans, we'll need to look at it. If this was not before us tonight, and we had the small area plans in front of us 3 months from now or 2 months from now, that would be a big chunk that's surrounded by Chatham Park. And I think it's in our interest, in the town's interest, to figure out what's going to happen in that area where we may need to do as a town, do some sort of future thinking of connections. Is it along a sewer connection or a stream corridor or something like that? And then how are those roads that are in the small area plans, how do those feed into this track? Is it only one access that's interconnecting? Should there be more than one access? Is it an access that's available to every property, at least somewhere in that area? Those are things that we'll have to think about when Chatham Park not only plans for their acreage that they have, but we have to plan for the entire town and what happens beyond Chatham Park's boundaries.
Thank you.
Because they will have their development there'll be future development based off of their development. Just as we're having tonight, you can't plan for Chatham Park in a vacuum. It's going to affect something else. So we have to ensure that there's connections and ways for properties to be accessed. We can't landlock people in. And that's why we have to have standards for roads, because however Chatham Park builds, a future developer of this 190 acres will need to have the same similar type of road, so there's no difference when you're driving down that connector street. So we have to think about those types of things. And if it's not in the small area plans or the additional elements, we need to have it in our UDOs and our policies of the town of how all this is going to happen. So that's what staff is planning for whenever we're evaluating all these developments that will be coming because of Chatham Park. And that's why I have that however. We don't know what's going to happen. We do know population will increase. We do know that transportation is obviously going to change because there's one street in right now. How that looks is unknown today. So those are things that we'll evaluate later down the line. or that should be evaluated down the line.
Does this property have any significant streams, or does it have any areas that have been identified as important natural areas?
I don't know that.
I'd be interested to know about
Yeah,
that.
yeah, we could report back on that to the planning board and then back to this board.
You're the group that
August
works on
8th.
conservation plan and the tree ordinance plan. I know they've identified areas,
Yeah.
and I'd be interested to know if that contains any of those.
Yeah, and that would definitely be things that we would look at in the development plan. So if it was a policy of the town or an ordinance of the town, that we preserve those areas, that would definitely be something that we'd have to look at. You know, one of the UDO module or UDO things we're thinking about is tree protection, and how much percentage of tree coverage we have now relates to a tree protection percentage for future development. That certainly would apply to this type of development moving forward. Once that
If they were
UDO
to make an submit something before we have our UDO done, then there wouldn't be much protection at all.
There wouldn't be. I mean, unfortunately, that unless there was some sort of federal or state mandated regulation that they would have to follow along stream buffers, then there wouldn't be anything that the town, that I think that we would go above and beyond that until we have something in place from UDO.
Well, when we talk about interconnectivity and there's a possibility that even if this property isn't rezoned, it could develop today.
It could.
And if it were to, we would still be looking at it for those interconnectivity opportunities. Because it's sound planning principle regardless of the size of the property, regardless of the timing of the property. Because you never know how things are going to develop, but you've got to plan for those interconnections. So whether the property around it develops, or whether it develops, or whether it gets rezoned, we still need to be looking at sound planning principles for the logical extension of utilities, for the logical connections of roadways, pedestrian paths, all of those things.
90-plus lots could happen today under the current zoning that we have. That's pretty significant land use out there in and of itself. So I think we would definitely be looking at those types of connections and plans for all those things that we spoke about tonight.
I guess I'm concerned a bit about a procedural issue, and that is that although staff has made their recommendation, the public hearing is being held tonight with only one member of the planning board, I believe, present. And I would like to see us more adequately notice members of the planning board, even though that may not be a requirement. I think they need to have heard this discussion, and I think that they could benefit by it. Of course, I understand that what you'll do before the planning board next week is you'll give them a summary of what has occurred tonight.
Can they receive copies of things that people have said and submitted? Do they copies of those things?
They could. Definitely. This is one of the first times that since I've been here that we've gotten written statements on rezonings.
I think it'd be nice for the planning board to have access to those.
We have all of my extra copies up there.
And Alice Lloyd, are there audio recordings on? When do they come on to the website?
Normally on Tuesday. After the meeting on Monday.
So ostensibly, the planning board could listen to what it is that we've discussed tonight then.
Correct.
Are there further questions, or is there a motion to be made by the board?
I have one small question, Mr. Jones. It's in reference to this right-of-way, which Ms. Kelly had indicated in her remarks here.
Okay.
And I was just wondering, could you sort of explain that? Is that going to be the case, a right-of-way across her property, or what is the situation? Or you may not know right now.
I think Ms. Kelly's property, Are you the 62483?
Yeah, I'm this piece of property,
Yeah.
and as you can see from this drawing here, this is a landlocked piece of property. So currently, the only access from this piece of property is across my little strip of road, and then it goes into Russet Run, which starts out a dirt road and then turns into a paved road. Now they're redoing the whole thing in Chatham Park right there. So this is landlocked property except for my dirt road here.
So where's your house in relation to that?
It's right up. Oh, you know what? I've got a better drawing for you. You want to see this? Here is the way you come in. So this actually goes out to 15501, and this is the strip of road that accesses that piece of property. I don't know. This is like such a funny little triangle there. But that's where, this is actually,
Your house is located 83 feet from the boundary with the lot, is that correct?
it probably is correct. The house is now oriented in a different direction since I had my windfall and the tree blew down on my house. So it's a smaller house and it faces a different direction, but so now my house faces this way, so the whole back of the house is here. So all the traffic going up and down here, which till right now has always been just the Crispin family, goes up and down this road. And they always drive nice and slowly, but if you go fast, there's a lot of dust. But all of it, when they were logging, it was pretty loud. There was a lot of stuff going on. Yeah. It'd be a whole lot of people. One of my thoughts that I kind of didn't say was, well, maybe it'll be a walkable community and they'll be walking by my house.
Can I have one word to say about the road?
Certainly. And would you like to look at the map? Okay. Thank you.
The only comment I wanted to make is that Russet Run Road, this private easement, was created, again, nearly 50 years ago for the purpose of serving this property. Well before, I assume, Ms. Kelly acquired her property and began using it also. The other thing is, as Mr. Jones has been has been pointing out, and as several of you have discussed, it's unlikely that in the long term the only access, or perhaps even the primary access to this property, is going to be that existing easement. There's certain to be connectivity in the property that develops around this property.
Thank you, Patrick Bradshaw. Are there other questions for Jeff Jones or other comments to be made? Is there a motion to send this to the planning board?
So moved.
Second. Moved by Michael Fiocco, seconded by Pamela Baldwin. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries unanimously. We need a motion then to go out of public hearing. May we do that?
Second.
Moved by Bette Foley, seconded by Michael Fiocco. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries unanimously. And there is the calendar for the upcoming. So the planning board meets...
No. That's the next item. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'll get it off of that.
Well, the planning board does meet July the 6th, right?
August 1st.
August 1st.
Yeah, we're already in August. Next Monday night at 7 o'clock in this room.
Thank you very much. So we're now at old business, the rezoning request for West Street to C2 Highway Commercial.
Give it all.
Let's take a pause for a second just to let people readjust themselves.
All right.
Okay.
Jeff Jones will lead us in this. We had a public hearing on this at our last meeting. Did you?
You did. In June, on the 27th, the second meeting in June, you had a public hearing, and you heard from the applicant, Mr. Plummer. And at the July 6th meeting of the planning board heard his request and voted to recommend approval with a 6-0 vote. The character of the land is such that it fronts a highway. The planning board thought that it's probably not residential, and it's probably more commercial than residential, and then voted to recommend approval 6-0. But we have heard the public hearing. I don't think there was anybody who spoke at the public hearing except for the applicant, and no one spoke at the planning board meeting on the request. And we're here tonight for final determination of the board. I'll just reorient you. These are the lots, the third parcel in from Highway 87 and 64, the intersection there. And you'll have to do a consistency statement and then either vote to approve or vote to deny.
Questions from the board? Or motions on the consistency statement?
I just have a comment, and I know there's no way to enforce this, but I just hope that if these properties are rezoned, that every step be taken to protect the two historical homes on that property.
You'll motion to agree with the consistency statement on the board.
Motion to accept the consistency statement for the 606 West Street.
Second.
Motion made by Pamela Baldwin, seconded by Jay Farrell, to approve the consistency statement stating it is in consistency with the land use plan. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed. Motion carries unanimously. Then is there a motion to either accept or deny the rezoning request?
Motion.
Before we make a motion, I'd like us just to know that the documents that we have in our packet, I think, have been amended
They have. And the screen has been amended.
Very good.
Alice has the...
And I'll put them on those.
Oh, you got them?
Yeah.
You have them.
Okay. The amended
Just
ordinance.
clerical things,
Yep.
you know, the reference to showing case numbers that got mixed up.
That's right. The resolution adopting the consistency statement is the one that's on, not in your packet, the new one. So is there a motion to make the zoning change in accordance with the resolution?
Motion to approve the zoning change in accordance with the resolution.
Second.
Motion made by Pamela Baldwin, seconded by John Bonnet. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Shannon Thomas. That was item number 1 under old business. The second item is a special use permit request for Northwood High School for the modular building. Jeff Jones again.
Yes, ma'am. Mayors and Town Board. This is special use permit 2016-01 for Northwood High School modular building. Public hearing was held on June 13th. There was no public comments given during that public hearing. You did hear from the applicant and their professional folks who have worked on the plan. The plan was to add a modular building that's to help with additional growth that will happen over the next 4 or 5 years at Northwood, and presentation was given to the Plan Board at their July meeting. They voted to voted to recommend approval for us with a 6-0 vote. And there's a resolution in your packet that, if you see fit, may be able to give approval. That would be awesome.
See, the resolution is attached to the memorandum dated July 19th. Is there a motion to approve the resolution to approve the special use permit for Northwood High School?
Well, I've got a question, and I believe at the public hearing there was discussion about sewer. And at the time, there was mentioned that a request for sewer allocation would be accompanying this agenda item. And I don't see it.
Yeah, it's not finalized yet of what that's going to be. We know that they need one, and where that starting point is going to be, and what the request needs to be. Hopefully, will be at your next board meeting.
So,
for the purposes of this unit, we can approve it tonight and then come back and get the sewer allocation shored up a little bit.
I want to make sure that the applicant is aware and knowledgeable that without sewer allocation, they could go forward and build something and not occupy. Right. And that would be a risk they would take. Yeah.
Do you want to make that part of the motion, Mr. Beer?
No, I'm fine with, I think that I trust that our internal systems will work, and that without an allocation, they will not receive a CBO.
Let's hope Jeff Jones doesn't get abducted by aliens.
Or hit by a car, as
well,
your seatbelt.
If we are concerned about that, I would say that I would add a stipulation to this special use permit that a sewer allocation be obtained prior to breaking ground on the project.
Already broken ground.
Oh, boy.
Prior to occupancy.
That's better.
Have they broken ground because the pad is there, or have they, because my remembrance from the planning board meeting was that there was a concrete pad on which the unit would be placed?
There's ground that has been broken.
Okay.
There was some movement of things that needed to happen, so that school will be ready for students in the next few weeks.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the pad is sitting in the parking lot where the bus is usually.
So you've heard the amendment or stipulation of Michael Fiocco with respect to the adoption of the resolution for the special use permit. Did we have a motion? Have we had that?
I think, quite frankly, the applicant has to accept this stipulation.
Right, and that would be part of what the mayor and the applicant signs, but if you would like for the applicant to verbally give you that and then sign the documentation at a later time, I do believe the applicant is here.
Okay, yeah, if the applicant would like to do that.
Very good.
Thank you, sir.
I think they heard us.
Saved us all some time.
Do we have a motion now?
I make a motion to approve.
Second.
Moved by Michael Fiocco, seconded by John Bonnet, with the stipulation. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed. The motion carries unanimously. Thank you.
Fair enough. I'll amend the resolution, Mayor, and then I'll get you a copy so you can sign and then get a copy to the applicant.
Thank you. Old business item number 3 is a preliminary plat review for the Davis Street cottages.
Yeah.
I believe we're continuing with your
Yes.
Jeff Jones hour.
That's correct. Glad to be here. This item has been hanging around for a few months now, pretty much the entire tenure of my time here. And what we had this come before the board at their, I think it was the June 13th meeting. and the board was asked by the applicant to give consideration to their project again. Essentially, in September of last year, the applicant was given consideration, and there was a vote to approve, and that vote to approve was not passed. It was a 3-2 vote, or a 2-3 vote, and so that vote failed, and there was no subsequent vote to deny on top of that vote to approve. So the applicant is here back before us to have the board consider his project again. At the 13th meeting of June, there was some questions about pre and post development, and some analysis by their engineer, and some review by the town's engineer has occurred, and we can have questions on that, and Fred will be able to answer those questions. And the applicant is here. What we would be doing tonight, if we get to a place where we're going to make motions, we're going to have either a motion to deny, and that would move forward. We would have a motion to approve, and that motion would need to carry a couple of different things. The waiver of frontage standards that is spoke about in the analysis, and what is requested by the applicant. And we would also need, either in another motion or in the same motion, the sewer allocation for these 8 lots that we will need to take care of, because that hasn't been taken care of in the prior meetings that we've had on this project, dating back some year plus now. And staff is here to guide you through that process if we need some guidance. But answer any questions that you might have.
Jeff, what is that sewer allocation?
I want to say the applicant's now requesting 3120. That's what I've got down here.
For gallons per day?
Yeah. I think that's correct.
So that's the equivalent of 26 bedrooms?
He's got 390 per unit, but that's not a typical 3-bedroom home. That's more of a 3.5-bedroom home.
So is that trying to accommodate the clubhouse?
There may be a bathroom in the clubhouse. That would be a good question for the applicant. Because I think my understanding is a 360 is a typical 3-bedroom home. So we're looking at a 390 per unit allocation request. But we could ask the applicant.
Mike Nash.
Yes, that is in anticipation of there being bathroom facilities in the common building. This would be included.
Are there any other questions for either Jeff Jones or the developer?
Well, I'll say that working with Fred and the developer's engineer, I've got to the point where I am more comfortable with the runoff issue. And the storm event that I asked the engineer to study was the 100-year, which is a big event. And the analysis shows that the post-development runoff is only 5%, increases only by 5% over the pre-development condition, which is quite minimal. And some engineers would tell you that's within the error of margin of error. And so I'm feeling more comfortable about that. I was very, very concerned about the downstream safety of folks post-development. I'm more comfortable with it at this time. One of the recommendations that Mr. Royal has made is that there be an improved pathway for this water. I think that's an important feature of the project. And the original recommendation was that be in a private easement, but I am more comfortable with it being in a public easement because it is collecting water from about 12 acres of land owned by many different parties, some of which is public roadway water that's going to be traveling this course. So I would prefer that, in fact, the project moves forward, that be a publicly maintained easement and not that the neighbors have to rely on a private entity that doesn't perform for problem issues and that they can call the town. Because I do think of it as more public water than private water.
I said this before, but I'm in favor of this project because I believe that it will support our downtown. These homes will be within walking distance of local businesses, and I feel like that's going to be a vital piece of, as Chatham Park grows, to have more people living within walking distance of downtown is going to very much support our downtown. I know some neighbors are concerned. Speaking from experience, I've had a 3-story apartment complex go in next door to my house, and there was a lot of concern that this was going to disrupt our quality of life, and it's actually turned out to be a positive. I didn't anticipate that we'd get these neighbors who I really like, so I think that we're growing, and I think that this will benefit greatly our downtown to have more people that can walk to downtown.
Well, I've always have said, I don't feel like this is consistent with our land use plan. I'm not going to support it. I do have some reservations with the neighbors. On the other side, the culprit, I understand they're going to just plan on doing a swale. How's that going to be handled by the homeowner there as far as mowing, anything like that? I mean, I understand it's a 6-foot swale, is that correct?
Yes, that's my understanding as well. And I believe that it's been designed such that, you know, the slope on that will be minimal to make it that much easier to maintain.
I guess you knew the trees that we must have bad winds going to come through sometime in the last few weeks, because I had 2 extremely large pecan trees on our property came not down, but they got some kind of high wind, took the tops out of them. Yeah, came right across, headed by that oak tree and down by that other tree over there. So.
Took 2 of them down.
Yeah.
2 of them.
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
So I understand that the impression is that swale has been designed, but I don't know that Fred has had the opportunity to look at that and confirm its capacity, that it is handling this flow of water. So that is yet to be done. I think it will have to be done, and I think the interest of the homeowner, and it's probably 2 homeowners the way I read the topography straddles the property line, would be on 2 property owners that it should be designed in such a way that it is mowable, so that the side slopes aren't so steep that grass freely grows on it and is accessible, and it's typically no greater than a 3-to-1 slope. So, but I think that's yet to be designed and approved, but it needs to be part of the project if it moves forward.
Sure.
Are there further questions?
I don't have a question, I just have a comment. I am still concerned in reference to the other homeowners there and the information where we have to actually grant an exception. I don't know whether this would be fair to others, but in the progress, in terms of progress and for the town, if it does indeed meet what is necessary based on our ordinances, then I would support the plan. But again, I do understand what the homeowners are saying also.
Is
the board would appear to be ready for a motion. As Jeff Jones has indicated, we are looking either for a motion to deny or a motion to approve with the waiver of the frontage and the sewer allocation. What's the pleasure of the board?
I'd like to make a motion to approve, as you just read it like it says.
Yep. SUB, subdivision 2015-03.
Motion to approve SUB 215-03, Davy Street Cottage with an exception to the lot of frontage requirement as specified in section 6.4B of the subdivision ordinance. Additionally, motion to grant up to 3,120 sewer allocation for project.
Point of order. Would this be a time for discussion of that motion?
Yes, it would be.
Specifically, Commissioner Fiocco's concerns regarding the maintenance of the drainage facility across the street. Is that what I'm understanding? You propose that be public right-of-way and publicly maintained mode?
Public stormwater easement.
Okay. And is that what's been referred to as the swale?
Yes. So I would also add a friendly amendment that the swale be designed and approved by the town's engineering department, and that a public stormwater easement be established over top of that device with a width adequate for maintenance of said device.
And so, operationally, how would you see that working on a daily basis with town involvement or seasonal basis?
It may be probably on a monthly basis, if necessary at all. If the tree fell and was blocking the path for that water, then the town would come and deal with that.
But the town would not mow it?
The town, if the town thought it was detrimental to its function by not mowing it, then it would mow it.
Bette Foley, would you incorporate that in your motion?
Yes, I need to re-say it.
No, I think yes. Is there further inquiry, Mr. Bowman?
Yes, Commissioner Farrell, I'm curious if you think that would alleviate a fraction of the residents concerned that their maintenance of that swale they wouldn't be responsible for maintenance of the swale.
I doubt it, honestly. Yeah, I don't think that's always been a problem down on high rains and storms, water going down through there to that creek bed. As I said from the start, I know it was a big expense for the contractor. I thought if he could have put a pipe in down through there, that they said that was too expensive.
I believe where we are then is that we have a motion to approve with the waiver of the frontage of the sewer allocation and with the additional proviso that the swale on the east side of the road be a public easement with town maintenance. Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Motion made by Bette Wilson Foley, seconded by Michael Fiocco. Are there any additional questions?
So that public easement is going to need to be granted by those private property owners to have that public easement there.
If it were a private easement,
Same thing. So there's going to be some negotiation from the town to the property owner to make that happen, along with the developer and those funds.
I would like to say that I think this is an opportunity to improve the drainage situation.
Anything further? Is the board ready to vote? Those in favor of the motion as amended, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Those opposed?
Nay.
Motion carries 4-1. And we then proceed to the next item, which is the Chatham Park additional elements. Discussed Jeff Jones's additional help.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the board. We're here tonight to talk about the additional element review for the Chatham Park project. Staff over the last couple of meeting times has attempted to give some thoughts of staff to various elements. This is the sort of the chart that staff shared with you of the 12 elements. Last time, category review type was consultant suggested or not. In staff's thinking over the last few weeks, we've tried to come up with a timely review schedule that provides the opportunity for the town board and the applicant to engage in a public meeting forum where Chatham Park and their representatives would come before this board and give presentations on 4 of the elements over the next consecutive 3 meeting nights. This would give the town board and the public the opportunity to, one, from the public standpoint, hear what Chatham Park is proposing in various elements, and for the town board to be able to not only hear, but to engage in conversations as to what is in the additional element itself. Those 3 public meetings would lead up to a public hearing at some point in time on that 4th meeting night in September. From that public hearing, hopefully what we would have at the end of that is we would have all the public comments on the additional elements. We would have staff comments that would be provided to you all prior to that presentation on those 4 elements. So if the plan is to move forward on the August 8th meeting with the first 4 elements of the additional of the submittal, staff, not only in myself but others in town hall, would share with you comments that we have generated. We would also share with you all comments that have been generated by community organizations that have relative comments on that particular element or elements. That would hopefully give us some guidance as to a better understanding of what's in the elements. I think that's sort of been, we know that Chatham Park held 3 consecutive meetings with the public at their facility to cover the elements. And those were well attended by the public, but it wasn't in front of you all as a collective group where you all might be able to ask questions of Chatham Park about particular aspects of that element and be able to voice your opinion about such. So staff is thinking this might be a way to facilitate that. Now, it doesn't address, the timeline does not address consultants, it doesn't address a committee that may be appointed by this board. Staff is of the opinion that we could move forward with the public meetings and the presentations before this board, leading up to a public hearing where the public has the ability to state any comments to you all and to Chatham Park regarding the additional elements. We could then, in this time frame, be looking towards consultants on particular aspects that we need help on, affordable housing, public facilities. Your charge to staff would be to find us consultants or consultants, more than one that would help us with this, because we need to have the answer not only for Chatham Park but for the town as to how we're going to handle affordable housing and future public facilities and growth of the town's facilities and staff, and how that's going to affect how Chatham Park's going to affect us, how growth in general is going to affect us. we can be working on that in a parallel track to these additional elements. It may not be highly critical for us to track all the elements together, where we have one public hearing and one decision on all 12 elements. We may have the opportunity to have a public hearing. We will have a public hearing on all the elements if we go forward with staff's plan here. Or we could pull those out and have a public hearing on 9 of the elements, and 3 of the elements that we feel we need help on, or 2 of the elements we need help on. Those could track in a different time frame. What's currently happening in Chatham Park is development is happening. They're planning for buildings and shopping centers and whatnot. Those things are occurring. Without guidance or regulations of the additional elements for landscaping or parking or what have you, it reverts to our zoning ordinance that we have now or don't have now. I mean, quite honestly, there's some things that if we adopted something of the additional elements and development were to occur in Chatham Park, we would then be able to go to that instead of our zoning ordinance. So there might be some benefit into looking at some of those regulatory items like landscaping and parking and lighting or signage that staff has felt since the submittal, we can guide you on that. We can guide you through our UDO, what's happening with that, and we can get to a point in the next 3 months or so where we're comfortable with those elements. There are bigger elements that you all need to decide on if you need more help. And it may be that you want help on all the elements. But we do know, and staff has been pretty vocal, that there's at least 2 elements that consultants are warranted here. This is sort of my shot at it. It gives us some guidance, some plan. I'm open to any discussion that you all may have amongst yourself, and questions from me or Brian or Fred or whomever is here that can help you to get to a point. I think there was some information included in your packets as to maybe potential applicants who have applied to be on the committee. Structure of that committee, you all would need to hopefully define that and be ready to tell staff how that committee or committee and subcommittees of that committee should function. And if we're not there yet, I think we could still move forward with the public presentations and the engagement from the town in Chatham Park, and we can move forward with finding consultants. One aspect that I'm not in control of, but you all are, is the committee. And if you want to have a committee, you need to decide as a group and direct staff to staff that committee, direct that committee, do whatever we need to make happen with that committee. And I'm here to answer any questions that you have. Brian and anybody else would be able to answer any questions as well.
Board, do we have questions or thoughts about the schedule and the issue of the committee?
I do have one.
Well, I just want to say, I don't want to see our staff getting too overwhelmed with work. If we have the financials and the Chatham Park assistants to go ahead and get these consultants that we need ASAP, and then get our committee, so I don't want to see our staff overwhelmed with this work. If you're comfortable with it, it's a different story, but if you're spending 10, 11 hours a day. I hope you're not, but we need to get you some help, is what I'm trying to say.
I appreciate that. We all as staff appreciate that.
I agree with what Commissioner Farrell was saying. I would prefer if we go on and locate outside consultants and then identify, of course, the committee also, so they can simultaneously be looking at the same information, and then they can look at what the outside consultant has done as well, and then, of course, we can look at all of it. But I strongly suggest that we go on and locate outside consultants.
And that would be one who would be an umbrella consultant who would help us with all 12 elements.
Well, it doesn't necessarily have to be an umbrella one. It can be one for each additional element, whichever would be better for you all to get.
I think an umbrella consultant would be a colossal waste of money and time.
What do you think would be a waste?
Having one consultant over all 12 elements, I think, would be completely duplicative of what staff, of what various groups that are currently starting to look at these additional elements right now, as well as planning board, in addition to the town board, in addition to the consultants that in some ways we already have looking at a couple of these elements as it is. I just don't see the point in spending 5 figures on sort of an umbrella consultant for all of these.
So you think it's better to hire for specific?
That's kind of what we've...
Just for the affordable housing and for the public facilities, is that?
Affordable housing, public facilities, we've got Davenport kind of working, I mean, finance kind of comes into a lot of these elements. So I mean, those are the big ones. The public facilities is one that we've got. There's a couple of different ways we can go on that. I know that we've had some discussion with Chatham Park already, even before the elements were released, on how we were to go about that. So there's more data that we could make a few of these elements more robust, I think, as is, without without adding, I guess, the extra layer of review and discussion and process that I think would kind of duplicate what's already going on. Yeah, there are a couple of areas that almost immediately jump out as far as consultants above and beyond what we have right now. I think affordable housing is going to be slightly tricky because I know that you've had meetings with. I mean, we've had meetings with a particular affordable housing expert from Orange County. Tomorrow, the county manager, Siler City's county manager, and myself are meeting with reps from Triangle J on the county plan that's being put together. Triangle J has offered and has some staff in place should we want to go that direction as well. And so they're asking me about that. So I think we're kind of chomping at the bit to get to work on some of these, and that's why Jeff, kind of steps forward with some of this stuff. You guys can figure out what you want to do about that additional advisory committee or whatever it is. But I think on these, on some of these additional elements, we're ready to get going, and we're ready to put community stakeholders and consultants together and get to work on providing the information in some of these forums like Jeff's presented.
Yeah, if I could, I would give you another thought of mine that I've had over the last few weeks or so, thinking about the review and really what's going to be important for the town and where do we see the most need for additional help. I think it's important for staff to give you our opinion. We're professionals. We should give you our opinions on the various elements, and we're doing so. We're compiling those. We're committed to this schedule to give these to Chatham Park and to whomever would want to see staff's comments. I think it's important for you all to hear from Chatham Park as well, and then for the public to have that public hearing component. I suspect that we are not going to get to the end at the public hearing stage and Chatham Park is going to say, okay, let's keep the ball rolling. I suspect that they're going to hear a number of different opinions about the elements, and they're going to need to address those somehow, either it's in a different element, or we're not doing that for whatever reason, or, hey, that was a great idea, I'd like to incorporate it into this element. They're going to have another draft of these additional elements that they're going to facilitate because of the comments that we hear from staff, from you all, and from the public. In this time frame, it's anticipated that we're going to have a small area plan that is going to be so much more detailed into the interconnectivities, things that we talked about tonight, that is going to be, it's going to show a lot more detail than we have now, that will actually answer some of the things that aren't quite answered in the elements. This is the anticipation part is because that's what Chatham Park has been telling the staff. It's coming in a couple of months. I can already foresee that the elements are not going to be approved in a couple of months. So if their indication of that small area plan coming prior to the adoption or to the approval of the additional elements, we're going to get those details that we want in the elements, the typicals that we want to see. We're not asking Chatham Park to give us the details for the southern village, but what's a typical, greenway or something, or a road look like? Those things we don't know as a result of just reading the elements. And if the elements is looked as ordinance or conditions of approval, this is how Chatham Park will develop. We got to work a little bit at that, and what I've understood is that we're going to get more detail in the small area plan. Now we can just say, yeah, we need more typicals, more detail in the additional elements, and send Chatham Park off to do so, and that may be a response, a comment from staff. This is not detailed enough. We need more. That's where they're going to either give us typicals and the additional elements, or we're going to see the small area plan, and we're going to be able to say, we want that to govern development for the next 20 years in Chatham Park. We like that type of typical road network or what have you. That's what we have to think about is how's it going to develop in the future years to come, and making sure that the additional elements along with the small area plan has those details. Not, then we need to influence that either through the UDO or our comments. So if we get to a point at the end of September, 1st of October, and we've had these public presentations, you've had the ability to focus on those 4 elements that are before you in that night and be able to ask questions of Chatham Park and their folks. When we go through and we have the public hearing, and it's a long public hearing, but we hear from most people who want to speak on that. And Chatham Park hears the comments. Again, I suspect that we would not be rolling to the planning board meeting the very next week, that they're going to punt a little bit and come back and say, these elements have changed. We've heard it from the first day in May when we submitted it to the last day in September. We hear the comments. I understand that they want to hear all comments, be comprehensive of comments before they change anything. That's their right to do that, because if we make comments today, they change it, and those comments are, then there's further comments on that comment because of that change. So it's important to them to hear all the comments. That everybody has the ability to comment who can comment. They will redraft their elements. They will make it more robust. They will give us those details in the elements. They may choose to pull back the small area plan so they can get those details, those typicals in the small area plan. And it may be 2 or 3 months beyond that we get the small area plans. If we get to a point where we've heard all the public comments, staff comments, your comments, and we're still not comfortable. We're not to a point where we understand what this is, or we need more help, or if in fact they do give us those small area plans within a couple of months, maybe that's the time that we really focus in on hiring those gurus that can help us understand what open space is. We all know that what's in that document today isn't quite right, and we can generate comments off of that. We here in the room and organizations outside of this room can do that. Those can be our initial comments, and we can see where it goes from there. And if we get to a point where we're not comfortable, things aren't working, we can look to pivot some other way. But it could be important for you all to hear Chatham Park, to have that public hearing, and see where we are. In that time frame of the next 3 months while we're getting, let's hire consultants on some of those ones that we know. Let's finalize what a committee looks like if we ever appoint a committee. Because if it's not for the additional elements, we might want one for a small area plan. And have that sort of in our back pocket ready to go. And work really hard over the next couple of months while we're having these public presentations to charge that future committee with the right things to make them function. Because we don't want to appoint someone tonight and not be ready to tell them what to do, other than, here it is. Well, you know, we have the planning board members who are reviewing it. Some have already made comments. We've got Parks and Rec committee that's going to be making comments. We've got some appointed folks who are sort of doing that work. But there may be others in the community that you want to identify and appoint. I think we need to start from sort of a framework of what a committee looks like. Maybe agree to a size of a committee. I'm not even sure if that's where we're heading tonight. But maybe it's the next meeting, we have them in front of us, but we also have an agenda item as to what's the committee look like. Is it 4, 5, 10, 15 people? You can kind of go that route.
Mr. Krusbeck, I have a question, if you don't mind, please. What you were referring to a few moments ago, you said that there are already individuals that are working on these elements. Is that correct?
Yeah, we've had conversations with people in the community. We've had conversations with consultants on, for example, on affordable housing. You've had 2 meetings with someone from Orange County. I'm having a meeting tomorrow with folks from Triangle J that are working on a county plan that have also expressed an interest in looking at the affordable elements, the affordable element of affordable housing within this package as well. So there are consultants out there, for example, for affordable housing, depending on what you want to do. They're capable of working on it. With public facilities, it kind of depends on how we want to go, and we can get into that a little bit later. But yeah, I've had conversations with. Actually, I've had RFQs, depending on how comprehensive we get with public facilities, because public facilities encompass more than just town hall; they encompass all town buildings. So we can certainly be very directed in looking at working with a consultant that looks specifically at town hall and how we need to grow town hall as we grow with Chatham Park. Or I think then too that we also need to look at a consultant that takes a comprehensive look at all of our facilities and not just town hall. Davenport, for example, has not only given us some financial breakdowns of, giving us this preliminary breakdown, assuming we get to it on the agenda tonight, the financial breakdown as we go into possible debt financing to expand a public facility like our wastewater, our wastewater treatment capacity is another example. But they've also placed some work into some financing options for a new town hall, for example. And so we've already started to have a lot of those conversations that are affected by these, by these additional elements, and we can certainly expand that too. I know on this matrix that we looked at the last meeting, even though it does say with stormwater, parking, signage, lighting, well, heck, even public art for that matter, but let's just focus on stormwater. Stormwater in and of itself could very well have a consultant. Parking and loading, signage and lighting, maybe you package and you have a consultant give us a few hours of work on that too. I mean, there are opportunities to get to get some outside additional help on this, even though we may not have explicitly asked for it here. But my only point was that I think I would much rather put paid expertise directly onto a specific issue rather than to hire, to waste money like we did with the Lawrence Group and, have them basically regurgitate things that we had already, work that we had already done anyway. So I guess that's kind of my 2.5 cents on that. And like I said, we're already at work on many of these anyway. So.
That's understandable.
Well, I would chime in on the idea that there are, of the list that we identify as we think need consultants, in my mind, transit is one of them, that we could benefit from a knowledgeable consultant. And one that really was, at least I received an inordinate amount of requests on this particular item, and that was lighting and preservation of the night sky. And I think we could benefit from an expert because I'm nowhere near an expert in lighting.
And also incorporating some solar features too. Like some communities are using solar panels in parking lots to light the parking. Some of that, just some ideas of exploring ways that we can use alternative energy. And it seems to me that there's going to be a lot of overlap between the additional elements and the UDO. And so it seems like consultants that we use for this would also apply to the UDO. Is that correct?
For some of these.
That we could just use it. And I just wanted to ask a question. If an area is not included in additional elements, then Chatham Park would refer to UDO. Is that correct?
That's correct. Let's say by chance they bought the 190 acres that was earlier tonight.
Okay.
Let's say that's
okay.
it's not part of their PDD, and it would be subject to whatever town standard is there at the time.
So if there's an area that we feel is going to be pretty identical to what the additional elements would be and what would be in the UDO, is that something that we would strike from the additional elements and saying it's just going to be covered by the UDO? Is that something that could happen or not? It just seems like we're going to be doing
duplicative
similarities. I'm just throwing that out. Or do we just need these right away? The UDO is going to take longer.
Yeah, I'm going to be presenting at the next board meeting the schedule for the UDO review. The consultant and myself sat down last week and went over how do we get to the finish line in the UDO. And because I need to be able to articulate that to you all and to everyone else, because it's paralleling these additional elements as well. So we need to figure out what the end game for the UDO is. I hope to be sharing that.
It should just be the things that we think are going to be different than UDO.
That could be a way to look at it. One aspect could be that this board, you all, as of the approval authority in charge today, would bound Chatham Park those elements and those small area plans that they are requesting and that we refine, and that future boards might not be able to change those because that's the developer agreeing to those things. If we were to remove lighting and say it's subject to a town ordinance, town ordinances can change more easily than the PDD because the applicant, the owner, would have to agree to those changes. Just as he's putting forth, this is how Chatham Park will develop, and we're trying to say yes to those things. So that's just one caution there of removing elements from Chatham Park is you want to be able to say, no, this is, even if it looks very similar, because we want it to be, and I've expressed that I would like a seamless transition between Chatham Park and Pittsboro because they're one and the same. That's the way it should be. Pittsboro is Chatham Park is Pittsboro. So if we have similar, if not the exact same thing for lighting, hey, that's great. Or parking, hey, that's great. That would be there. That's what we have to try to convince the applicant that we want.
I think the important distinction is the additional elements. And quite frankly, there's a question in my mind. Well, I guess the additional element could state that it is subject to the town's ordinance, and that would be the contents of the additional element. But to strike an additional element probably goes back to the master plan.
Master plan stated these things shall be included in a future submittal that would then give more entitlements to future development.
And we certainly under the impression that Chatham Park would be held to the UDO at the time of entirely.
I think there's been a lot of conversation from their aspect is that whatever they're going to do is going to be better than the town or as complementary to the town. That's what we're doing.
Well, but that is a true statement. It just doesn't apply to everything.
A good example that might be something that we would have that Chatham Park may not is Chatham Park requires pedestrian crossways. The town all does as well. Internal crossways and parking lots. Chatham Park may say, hey, we're good with stripes. But the town says, no, we want stamped, bricked crossways, pedestrian paths in the parking lot. We would then, well, the way I understood it is we would then ask the developer to do that. Unless they wrote in there, all crossways shall be white striped or something like that. That would be the caveat there.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that...
That's where we need to review the
elements. Maybe there are different people developing than the folks that are here now. There may be different people. And so just to make sure that the town...
So this has been a very interesting conversation. Mr. Grusbeck, going back to your concern about not duplicating or not wasting effort on consultants, I'm very much supportive of your sentiments. But I think that there are probably some things that I just don't know that we've looked at. I understand that Davenport has been doing extensive financial analysis. What was the basis for that in terms of the phasing, in terms of the actual growth? What assumptions were used there? And I'm thinking that, I'm just imagining, and tell me if I'm right or wrong or what, but I'm imagining that there are some really high-level types of analyses, perhaps even environmental analyses, that we may need to be able to, with confidence, approve or disapprove the whole package or any fraction of it.
Yeah, I don't know that we're disagreeing on any of that. All I'm saying is that as opposed to having one consultant that is the lord of all additional elements, I would rather use that time and money and frankly energy and staffing, even though it may seem counterintuitive, but having experts within a particular area staff particular additional elements. I'm not at all suggesting that we not do consultants for certain issues.
Okay.
For public facilities, no, the master facilities plan would get into projection and population projection, and I know even Chatham Park has done a little bit of that analysis that didn't show up in the additional elements because I kind of helped do it. But Davenport, to this point, just to clarify, has kind of been helping with financing options. Given some of the things that we've talked about as far as facilities are concerned. So that's what I mean when we say that we've kind of already gotten into some of that.
Sure.
Stuff. But in no way, shape, or form am I saying that we shouldn't do consultants. I'm just saying that we shouldn't do a consultant for everything.
That would be the overall the one that creates the that should be. I agree with that.
Yeah, I'm more or less agreeing with you. I think.
Yeah, I hear you. And then I guess the other substantive high-level comment that I have, the most compelling thing that I've heard yet from any of the commentators is that this seems a very ambitious project without much precision in time frame. And, I wonder, what are the bounds of the projections that you've fed to Davenport, for example?
We haven't done any projections with Davenport. As far as facilities or
revenue.
Yeah, you'll see later. Again, we got to get to that portion of the agenda. But you'll take a look. And tonight, what we're looking more or less once we get to Davenport is more of a historic performance and what kind of position we are in to assume debt. We can certainly get into, I think, the next phase of projecting forward revenues.
Good.
Things of that nature that we'll be doing. Tonight, we won't necessarily be discussing that, as you can probably see from the materials that you had over the weekend. But, other than that, I don't know precision of time. I'm not quite sure what you're getting at with that.
Well, I'm taking it that the additional elements are presuming to guide the project in perpetuity, or 30 to 50 years until build out.
Okay.
And I think that seems to me impossible. But I certainly it's a big task, and I admire them and their consultants for attempting it. But I'm wondering if we should perhaps back up and ask for a more reasonable time frame, something like 15 to 20 years. I don't know. It's just a spitball idea, but it seems the most compelling comment that has been delivered to me, that we really may want to rein this in, to be more precise with our understanding of where we're going.
Well, I think those are all conversations that you need to have within the framework of maybe each additional element.
Yeah.
Once you get to that point. That's and those are things that we kind of try to bake into the additional elements with a bit more precision. I don't disagree with you on that.
And I guess my final comment, Mr. Jones, is thank you very much. Everything looks great up until just after September 26th. Beyond that, I'm relieved. Let me say I'm relieved to hear you say that you think there may be kind of an escape valve type behavior here, because frankly, that's really daunting to me. From the reading that I've done, many questions that I have yet to even be able to formulate because of what I'm still encountering. I had just kind of envisioned, maybe I pulled this out of nowhere, but December, January, before this board would formally be faced with a decision.
Those last three are highlighted because my thinking is those are subject to change. Those are, because you could get to the final presentation and say, gosh, I'm just not ready to call for a public hearing. You all call for the public hearing. It could be, no, we're not going to do that. And right. So those last three items are subject to change, either by the applicant or by the town.
Does it all have to be approved at the same time?
Okay, do you agree?
It could be, we could hold 12 separate public hearings for each individual element. I wouldn't suggest doing that. I would suggest combining the ones that are similar in nature and having a public hearing on those.
And it also comes to mind which ones are most pressing for Chatham Park too. What's holding them back? What do they need to get moving on? And I think that would be helpful information.
And they may be able to articulate to you all that. And there may be an answer to that question.
Well, I must admit that as much as you think that perhaps a public hearing on each element might not be practical, the idea of having a public hearing on all 12, in my mind, is not practical.
It isn't.
Maybe grouping.
It isn't.
Because a public hearing on the master plan that goes till 1 a.m. is nothing compared to trying to entertain all 12 at 1 a.m.
Yeah, and I thought that you could either hold, if this was sort of, yes, this is great, we get to the 26th, and we start the public hearing, and we just carry the public hearing on. Because we have other business of the town that has to occur at these meetings. And I envisioned, at least for the presentations, those to be 30 to 45 minutes in length. Certainly we want those to be as comprehensive as they need to be. But there is no control at that public hearing because we could have 300 people sign up to speak, and we need to give them all 3 minutes to speak. So we could be there a long time. We can work with that. We can work on that public hearing. If we need to have 3 public hearings on those 4 elements, like we're doing the presentations on, that would be fine. But yes, we would be here a long time if we held all 12 at the same time.
Well, I would like us as a governing body to set ourselves a deadline to come up with a charter for the Community Review Committee, or whatever it's to be called. And some expectations, and perhaps even a rough calendar for them. I don't know if that's appropriate, but I understand what you said, that there's going to be a back and forth, and then that they may do better, or actually some of their work may be done before it comes time to convene that body, where they may be needed for a small area plan. But I'm also thinking that if indeed there are significant revisions, there may be better use of their time to have them at it after that, rather than hashing over drafts that we've hashed over.
Although I was thinking that it would be nice for the committee to be present for the presentations by Chatham Park and staff, which would mean that we'd have to really accelerate our schedule.
Or delay the
presentation.
I would hate to accelerate and not hit the mark, and do something too quickly. I think if we delayed it by a meeting or two and got those presentations rolling in September rather than August, I would rather that, especially if the board feels like that committee, whoever that is, needs to be at the presentation. That's for you all to think about.
I have given to the paper a letter to the editor this week in an effort to try to elicit more interest in the Citizen Advisory Committee and ask that people get their resumes to Alice Lloyd by the 15th of August. And I was just pulling a date out of the air, but the and moving things forward just a little bit, you know, if the board still feels that the committee could be useful or limited to a particular number of areas, I think that probably needs to be our next
we,
Next discussion.
if that was the thinking of the board, we certainly could do that, have the applications or the resumes due by the 15th, have them ready for the 22nd meeting. That's the second meeting in August. The schedule gets amended. We could talk about the committee's makeup at the 8th meeting and work over the next couple of weeks, because we haven't really talked about that. We've talked about a committee, but we need to talk about what the structure of the committee is. We could do that at the 8th. We could appoint that committee at the 22nd. We could then start presentations when we'd like for the applicant to be able to be agreeable to that schedule. So I'd need to talk to the applicant because I want them to be able to be here. So I would need to talk to them and start those presentations in September. And we could then at the 22nd meeting maybe come back with an amended schedule of presentations and what that looks like. And appoint the committee, have an amended schedule, work on the committee next meeting, and kind of go that route.
So thinking by the 22nd, or at the meeting of the 22nd, appoint the committee with full charter and organization.
See, that full charter will definitely indicate what they are, what's necessary for them to do. I prefer an advisory committee. And also, just there are individuals which members may have in mind that may have not submitted their resume that may be also interested in serving on the committee.
I think we really need to go very public with that, in the newspaper, or maybe an ad also, on our website and our Facebook page. I think we need to post it.
I think if you went social media with Facebook posting, that would probably generate more eyeballs than newspaper ad probably would do.
We did everything we can. Part of it is, yes, we want their input, but it's also a chance for people to see that we want to involve the community. And I think it's really important to give people that opportunity.
Is it on the website, Allison?
Yes, ma'am. What I knew, that was all, that we were accepting letters of interest, because y'all didn't give me a deadline or anything.
We can work on that and work on that charter too, and I can give you some thoughts on that leading up to the 8th meeting. We'll start from sort of scratch charter and kind of an advisory committee charter and go from there. And see where we go. You all will need to decide how big that committee is and what specific representation you might be seeking. Is it targeted towards certain disciplines, or is it just citizens who would like to be involved? So that's what you really would want to think about, is appointing people who are maybe knowledgeable of that field. Does that sound like a plan? All right, we'll come back on the 8th. Okay. All right, we're further along than we were last meeting, so we'll keep plugging along at it.
Thank you very much.
No problem.
Thank you.
No problem.
Utility poles are next, I guess.
Yes, ma'am, it is.
My favorite thing.
Your favorite thing.
I was thrilled to see that the person who I thought was putting most of them up has been so intimidated by me.
That's right. That's right.
That he has not put up any additional material. So
that's right.
Oh. Aren't you powerful?
Maybe we'll just say he's being very respectful of the mayor and the town, not intimidated. wanted to bring this before you because we had talked about it in the June time frame, and I wanted to give you an update. I did speak with the poster guys, and specifically with Matt Barrett, and he did indicate that since the day he spoke with the mayor out on Hillsborough Street, that he has not placed any signs on utility poles in the town of Pittsburgh. We know that there's probably signs going up by others, and we see that. Staff in the June meeting gave a presentation as to what is currently in our ordinances, and there's some language that states that signs in the right-of-way aren't allowed, and it's sort of an enforcement thing. There is a section in the town code on advertising. That's section 3 of the town code. And we could further have regulations that are not only in the zoning ordinance, but it's in the town code, and it could be simply as staff has put before you tonight, signs on utility poles. Shall be unlawful for any persons to advertise or attempt to advertise by placing signage on any public utility pole within the right-of-ways of town of Pittsburgh. Public regulatory signs and public utility signs are exempt from this code because we want those types of signs to be able to happen. To sort of move in that direction, we would need to formalize that, hold a public hearing, and do that by an ordinance. Tonight was just sort of a way for you all to discuss it. Is this something that staff needs to move forward with? If so, we can certainly do that. If you feel like the current ordinances that we have are adequate enough, and it goes down to enforcement, which I've spoke about in the last time we spoke on this, is we could probably go out there tomorrow and rip all the signs, take all the signs down. Let's say rip, take the signs down. They would be back up, and it would be an ongoing enforcement issue for the town. Limited staff is unfortunately what we're dealing with, and resources to enforce that. So that's a consideration for the board to have on the issue. Because I do believe that once we started the program of removal of the signages on the utility poles, we would need to keep at that for some time to really kind of get the word out and regulate that. And there's still probably going to be some that get put up, and we'll just have to take it down. So that's all for your consideration. Change the town code, enforce the current code with limited staff, or keep plugging along what we're doing.
So if we added the town code, what would that change?
Maybe the person that people or departments that might be involved in enforcing it. I don't really know. I mean, I know the zoning ordinance typically is the planning department. We are enforcing those ordinances. If there's other town codes, they could fall under public works or police or what have you to enforce. So that could be the reason to change it, is that there might be more staff to enforce that regulation.
Part of the other piece of this is providing an alternative so that, we want to support local businesses that have live music and things like that. So I think in conjunction with this, we need to also be putting into place what the alternatives are.
Yeah, and kiosk, it's been discussed by this board as putting up kiosks.
Yeah, if we take action, I would like us to take two-handed action.
And it seems like we could put signs on the poles. It's unlawful, but what the ordinance is, and just put it right on the pole.
It seems a little weird to put a sign on a pole that says you cannot put a sign on a pole. That just seems...
Post no bills.
Right.
Although, it's just in the beginning where people understand, because otherwise,
it would
from out of town, they don't know.
That would be the most effective way to advertise our new enforcement of the ordinance. Yes.
At least temporarily.
Yeah, temporarily.
Yeah.
It's not a bad idea, temporarily.
And it's it could be.
If people continue to put things up.
I don't know.
There really isn't. I mean, I guess the zoning ordinance for zoning violations, if one could be, is probably could go to like $50 a day per violation. So if someone put 5 playbills up or something every day, and staff was on top of that, like.
So the same violation, the same penalties as the yard sign.
Yeah, those would all that. I think that's what it would take. But it would take someone or multiple people sort of camping out downtown, which might not be a bad thing, especially not on a hot day like today, but a nice fall day. That might be a place to be.
Temporary effort, but I'm curious, Mr. Robertson, is there a foot patrol component to your work currently, to this police department's work currently?
Well, all of our patrol officers do foot patrols daily.
Embarrassed to say that I wasn't aware of that.
I'm sure they are on foot in the downtown area walking around. So we could come back with and hold the public hearing, or do it through a zoning ordinance and enforce it like that.
What does the board think about the issue of the ordinance versus the existing reg?
I must admit that I do not have a problem with things posted on the poles. In fact, part of me finds it charming.
I enjoy reading.
So
I could see that perspective. I could see the other perspective as well. And what I would prefer is that we have a process and places where it is appropriate and welcomed for signs, temporary signs to be posted, flyers to be stapled, and so kiosks are something that I've been a very eager participant in the discussion in favor of. Do they look any better? Well, it's all in one space. And it's got a roof over it, so presumably it will last a little bit longer. Or I'm supposing it would. I think if we've already seen the one offender ratchet back his actions, I'm curious if it really warrants legislation right now.
Well, I have to admit that as I walk my dog in the morning, I've noticed that almost all of the signs are for events that have well passed. And if Public Works or somebody
Maybe we should do a one-day cleanup.
Did a one-day cleanup.
And see what happens from there.
It might, I'll tell you, the staples are going to be the hardest part.
Probably won't get them all.
But, and it is against... It is against not just our sign ordinance, but also against due power regulations. And if we gave it some degree of publicity, I must respectfully disagree with my colleague to the right here. I think it's the ugliest thing I've ever seen, but that's and I'm not altogether certain that it requires a duplicative, to provide somebody immediately. We had a very charming young man come to this meeting and offer the design for the kiosks that he used when he was an Eagle Scout, and I would be more than glad to go to the local scout troop and ask them if there's somebody that would like to build a kiosk or two for their Eagle project. But I'm not necessarily saying that they would have to coincide directly, but it would be nice, but I don't know that there are that many things that the poster guy would have put up in the meantime, and he is putting them up at Shadow Marketplace.
I'm more in favor of having something that's flat against a wall as opposed to a kiosk that takes up space on the sidewalk. Because to me, those get covered in paper. What makes that any better than a post being covered in paper? I mean, I see them in Chapel Hill, the kiosks don't look any neater than telephone
No,
poles.
they'll still be loaded
To
up
me,
to
if it's
Staples.
flat against the wall, and it's, like, I could see one being at the park downtown, and also there's one now on that building. To me, if you have one on each side of the street, I would rather see that flat, it's got glass over them that they drive, as opposed to the structure that's taking up precious space on our sidewalks.
Yeah, I thought of the park as well. I didn't know if that was an appropriate place for it. Yeah. But it could be, and you park staff, or whomever would just remove things when they're out of date, and that would help clean it up too. What we could do is not do anything ordinance-wise, but do try to find a day, hopefully when it's not 100, that staff can go out, and if we have 4 or 5 people kind of canvass that heart of downtown and take the signs down, and then kind of monitor it a little bit and see where we go. It may resolve itself by speaking to that one business. We'll see. That could be a way to handle it, and like I said, Mayor, maybe do some publicity in the paper about it. That would certainly influence the businesses in town that might be utilizing those poles for advertising. I could work with Brian and other staff to come up with a day that we might be able to do that, and maybe report back to you all.
That sounds good. I'm also curious if we could ask Mr. Grusbeck if Mr. Horn might be willing to share some thoughts regarding the design, placement of some facilities, whether flat or freestanding or both, to give a positive location for this kind of expression. I'd be very curious to hear his design thoughts. I really admire his aesthetic and
I think when Paul and I talked about it, he seemed to be much more interested in not seeking volunteer help to do it. He seemed to think that was cumbersome. Yeah. But I, like you, feel that in a sense, the less amount of regulation, the better. And if we can resolve it with a little publicity and a cleanup day, I'm volunteering.
All right.
Great. My staple remover.
Put you down as the first volunteer.
Thank you.
All right.
I do like the idea of coinciding, like not even going out in public with this until we have a replacement. And then it could be a positive. Hey, we put up these new places for you to put your information. Oh, by the way, no more polls. I mean, I like leading things off with a positive instead of a no.
I support that.
And so if we can wait till we have them before we can go ahead and clean up. It's not silent on that. But as far as going public with it, I would prefer if we could make the announcement, hey, we're providing these kiosks as opposed to this is not allowed. I thought it was much more positive.
By the way, Greg Lewis at the Roadhouse indicated that he'd be more than glad to put something up in his parking lot over there.
Great.
That would be a community bulletin board kind of thing.
That'd be great. We can maybe there's other businesses that would. And I think it'd be nice if they could be consistent so that people recognize them. Oh, that's the town's information board.
I will confess in reading this agenda item that I thought that this would be an indulgence of our time, but this has been a very constructive conversation, and I'm very glad that we did spend this time on it.
Thank you for indulging me.
Thank you, board.
Well, I think it's really important that it shows the passion with which we're approaching this challenge of keeping our downtown attractive and vibrant as we grow.
And while still supporting musicians and businesses that provide music and those kinds of things, it's important that we support them, but in a way that is pleasing to me.
Attractive and vibrant.
So we've now completed the Jeff Jones portion of the agenda. If Ted Cole has not gone to sleep, it's the back of the
Jeff,
yet.
where did Jeff go?
No, he didn't. He laid it right over there for me.
Would you introduce
water and sewer utility finance overview.
Good evening.
All kinds of
Colleagues, there are a couple other pretty important pieces that you guys have been working on that I really want to get in front of these guys, but I think as a starting place, we need to talk really about how we got here to this point and what kind of shape that we're in moving forward. And then we'll start getting into some of the future discussions on some of the more particular issues that we're dealing with.
Okay, perfect. There are page numbers in the lower right corner. At a very high level, goals and objectives, we're going to review the historical performance, financial performance of the town's water and sewer fund in order to begin to get a sense of the capacity of that fund to finance or fund future projects. And one of the things we'll evolve to is really more of a focus on wastewater rather than water. That's sort of the limiting factor as we understand it within your utilities. An overview of your existing water and sewer fund debt profile. There is some debt outstanding for that fund at this point. We're going to give you a little bit of an overview of some of the key financial ratios with regards to water and sewer systems and help you understand your strengths, potential weaknesses. Show you some peer comparatives to give you a little perspective about how you stack up under a number of specific ratios. Secondly, second bullet point, review your historical and projected wastewater flows. So the system flow itself, how has that evolved over time? How is it likely to evolve as you all continue to grow and manage that growth? And where would you potentially eat into your existing capacity, and how do you start planning for future capacity to support growth? And then finally, this is sort of an overarching goal, help to develop a capital funding model that will allow you all to put together a plan of finance to fund whatever projects there are that you would like to finance, and do so in a way that's going to provide you perspective on what might need to happen with rates and charges and how to continue to position this fund for future financial performance. So with that, very high-level overview on page 2 of the existing debt. On the left-hand side, we've summarized it. The bar chart, everything we look at is on a fiscal year basis, so we've just started fiscal year 17. We're showing you going back to fiscal year 16, so the year we just completed. You can see the dark green component of those bars are the principal payments that you make. The light green is the interest component. You can see all in, there was about $1.6 million of debt outstanding. That was issued over time for different projects from different sources, whether it's bank financing or GO bonds or USDA debt, those sorts of things. And we've pushed it all together on the right-hand side so you can see by fiscal year principal, interest, total payments over time. At this point, everything that you have in place today is paid off by 2034. On the right-hand side, far right-hand side column, the header says 10-year payout ratio. That's a measure that we look at to determine how much of that principal, that $1.6 million, will be repaid in the next 10 years. So it's a measure of how rapidly that debt is amortizing. And you can see you've had some nice step downs from 16 to 17, again from 17 to 18, and then it's essentially level for the next several years. So that's the debt that's on the books today, just for the water and sewer fund, has nothing to do with any debt that you might have out there for general government purposes. Okay? Page, Okay, page 3. This is the historical financial performance of the fund. We've got 5 years of audited financials here, so fiscal years 11 through 15. And I'll kind of walk down this fiscal 15 column just to orient you to the way we look at this. This is a cash flow model. We're starting, and all of these lines are numbered, by the way, and these should all tie back to your audit. System revenues there in 15 were about $3.3 million. Operating expenditures, what we're not calculating in there is anything about depreciation. It's not a cash item, nor do we have debt service in that expenditure line item. It's salaries, chemicals, supplies, those sorts of things. So operating expenses were about $2.2 million. And line 3, net revenue available for debt service in fiscal 15 was $1.1 million. So simply revenues minus expenditures, what's left to pay debt service. And in 15 it was $1.1 million. Your actual debt service was about $475,000. So skip down to line 16. This is one of the key ratios for a utility financing financial analysis, and that is a concept called debt service coverage. And what we're measuring is how many times over were your revenues available for debt service able to pay the debt service. So in other words, how many times over would the dollars in line 3 cover the payment in line 5? And you were at about 2.39 times. So for every dollar of debt service that you had to pay, you had $2.39 with which to pay it. And that's called coverage, and that's an important measure to determine what sort of cash flow the system has, what sort of ability does the system have to deal with variability in revenues or expenditures. And as you start talking about new projects, potentially new debt, that begins to help us understand the system's capacity to take on and service additional debt.
Mr. Cole, can you repeat? You had very simple language to define coverage. Can you repeat that, please?
Sure. In fiscal 15, essentially what that 2.39 times coverage was, for every dollar of debt service you owe, that's principal and interest, you had $2.39 with which to pay it. So your coverage was 2.39 times, and you can see as you look back in time, that coverage has ebbed and flowed a bit. It was in fiscal 13, it was 1.4 times, so much tighter than where it was in 15. And that's a function of several things: how revenues have varied, how expenditures might have varied, and how your debt payments might have varied. Okay? So back up, we then measure on line 7, that is net revenue after debt service. So we have our operating revenues, we pay our expenses, we pay our debt, and in fiscal 15 you had about $660,000 after making your debt payment. You then had on lines 9 and 10 some capital outlay for improvements to the system. Those are cash outflows, and left us with a system surplus that year of about $640,000 there on line 12. Now, as you look back in time, you'll see that in some cases you didn't have a system surplus. You had a system deficit, primarily because of capital improvements. In every year here, your line 7 is a positive number. So you're covering operations and debt service. In certain years, depending on the magnitude of your capital, it was a deficit position for the year. But if you look on line 14, you'll see that you've been carrying pretty healthy cash balances in the system, which is an important part of that financial makeup. Just like on the general fund, you need a certain amount of money in reserves to cash flow, to deal with unexpected events. Same holds true in a utility system. A certain amount of cash flow just to deal with day-to-day operations, but also the ability to deal with unexpected expenditures, capital outlay, what have you. So you can see there in line 14, at the end of fiscal 15, you ended with about $3.2 million in what we're calling fund balance. One of the other measures that we look at in a utility system, we've looked at it two ways on lines 17 and 18. So we talked about coverage. How many times over are you covering your debt or able to cover your debt? And then on lines 17 and 18, what we're measuring is liquidity of the system, cash of the system. And we measure it two ways. Line 17 is measuring fund balance as a percent of your operating expenses. So fund balance is line 14. Operating expenses is line 2. So your reserves in fiscal 15 represented about 144% of your expenditures. Okay? Said another way, how many days would you be able to operate without any cash coming into the system? And that's line 18, 527 days cash on hand. So if in some theoretical event no revenues were coming in and you had to use reserves to fund your operations based on the audited numbers, you had in excess of 500 days cash on hand. So both of those measures, and you'll see it in a moment, are very strong. I mean, those are all three of those measures: your coverage, the days cash on hand, and the revenue and the reserves as a percent of budget are all strong. But you can also see, as you look back in time, they have ebbed and flowed, depending again on revenues, expenditures, debt, capital outlay. There is variability from one year to the next. Okay.
The revenue figure, does that include capital fees?
I believe, let me see, in capital reserve fund, I don't know.
No, I don't believe it should.
Okay.
Okay. So that's simply operating revenue and expenditures. Got it. Great.
Okay. All right, so let's go to page 4, just to give you a little perspective on some of these concepts. Liquidity. So remember, look at the left-hand side, we've measured liquidity two ways: as a percent of budget, cash as a percent of budget, and days cash on hand. And this chart actually is graphing both of those. The left-hand axis is measuring days cash on hand, and that corresponds with the green bars. So you can see how your days cash on hand has evolved over the last 5 years. And then the right-hand axis is measuring reserves as a percent of budget, and that's correlated to the brown line. So we're measuring two liquidity measures here in lockstep with one another. And again, it's been relatively stable, and in 15, your reserves took a step up. We've given you the definitions there on the left-hand side, and then according to one of the national rating agencies, in this case Standard & Poor's, at a very high level, very basic correlation, days cash on hand in excess of 120 days for them is considered strong. So you clearly would fall into that strong category. The right-hand side gives you a little bit of perspective on some peer comparatives. We subscribe to a database that one of the other rating agencies, Moody's Investor Service, maintains. And so in this case, we're comparing Pittsboro in gold at the top on your unrestricted cash as a percent of budget. Remember, that was about 144%. How you all compare to national water and sewer systems that are AAA rated, which is the highest rating that any utility system can achieve, that are AA rated, and that are single A rated. Those are the dark green bars. And then we're comparing you to the same categories, but only within North Carolina. AAA water and sewer systems versus AA systems versus single A systems. So Pittsboro at the 144%, you can see, is really right on top of all three of the national medians and pretty decently aligned with between the A and AA North Carolina medians. So again, just a little bit of relative perspective on how you compare to these groups. Again, national and North Carolina systems compare pretty well. All right, next on page 5 is debt service coverage. So remember, we were tracking that over the last 5 years. It's ebbed and flowed a little bit. In fiscal 15, you can see it was up around 2.39 times. We've given you the definition on the left-hand side, and then again, according to Standard & Poor's, at a very high level, if you can demonstrate that you're at or above 1.5 times coverage. So for every dollar of debt service you need to pay, you have $1.50 or more to pay it. You're considered strong, and for all 5 of these years, maybe a little bit short in 13 and 14, you've been at 1.5 times or greater. And then the same setup on the right-hand side. How do you compare to those 6 different medians? National AAAs, AAs, and single A's. North Carolina AAA, AA, and single A. And here again, you compare pretty well. All right, so that's a historical look at financial performance, and hopefully a little bit of perspective on how you compare. I think you'll see it here in a moment. The takeaway is that the system's been well managed from a financial perspective, and you'll see also one of our conclusions is within reason, there is debt capacity within this system, and I'll expand on that a little bit. The next item we wanted to cover is on page 6, which begins to give you a little bit of perspective on historical and current wastewater flows. And we've lifted most of this information from a prior report that you all had commissioned from the Wooten Group. We're going back to 2011 through 15, and we're showing the average daily flow in gallons year over year, 11 through 15. Most recent year that we had it from that report was about 530,000 gallons per day. On the right-hand side, a little bit of commentary. The current annual average wastewater flow from the town is approximately 0.5 MGD, or 500,000 gallons per day. Peak daily flows and sustained peak flows are two other measures. Your staff can help explain how all of those things are calculated and tracked, but those were two data points that we wanted to include. Current wastewater treatment capacity. We go to a little bit of history here back to 2013. The town and Diener agreed to increase permitted discharge into Robeson Creek. This approach included it. So we go through those numbers, those amendments and increases. At the end of the day, I think the important takeaway, as I see it, is the very bottom bullet, which is the town's current wastewater treatment plant is sized for 0.75 MGD, or 750,000 gallons per day. So you're at a 500,000 gallons per day. The system is sized for 750,000 gallons per day. Okay. Page 7, also from the Wooten report, tries to help quantify projected flows. And so we go through column A is in 5-year increments. That was the data that was available, 2015 to 2020 to 2025 and so forth. We show under column B the projected flow from what's been called or described as the town limits. All right, so the 500,000, and that's expected to grow over time. Column C is the projected flows that will result or come from the ETJ, planned development. You can see what those numbers are beginning in 2020. Remaining ETJ development is column D. And so we sum all of those up in E, and we start looking at where are we now and where are we projected to be in terms of flows. Remember, your current plan is sized for 750 gallons per day. So under column E, it doesn't take too long to get close to that number. I certainly don't think I'm telling you anything you don't know. F is the compounded annual growth that gets you across those 5-year increments. G is then laying in what the potential flows or projected flows would be that would come from Chatham Park, what that compound annual growth would be, and I sums everything up. If all of this were to come online as projected, the flows, the compound annual growth rate, and the bullet point at the bottom is future flow projections indicate an annual average wastewater flow increase for the town and Chatham Park combined of about 0.15 to 0.2 MGD per year. That's just a simple average. It's not likely to occur that way every year, but it gives you a sense. So
again, you just used a straight line.
That's right. That's right. Part of what we were asked to do is not only sort of understand what this wastewater and sewer fund looks like from a financial perspective, but begin to understand what the capital needs are for the system, how those capital needs might be addressed, or the different options that you could consider. And I know that Brian has some items there that relates to options that are being discussed, but I wanted to share with you, sort of in advance of his talking points, our observations on page 8. And I'm the risk of just reading these verbatim, I'm going to more or less do that, but on the historical financial performance, there has been variability in the system's cash flows over the last few years. But all in all, the financial performance has been adequate, as evidenced by the following. So you've maintained strong cash reserves throughout that 5-year history. The water and sewer fund's liquidity position, that is, remember, your cash as a percent of budget or your days cash on hand, is currently in line with North Carolina and national medians. Those are from the comparatives. Your debt service coverage ratio is currently in line with those same medians. Development of a comprehensive and forward-looking capital program is critical to manage the system's future financial performance. Balanced approach to funding that capital between debt and pay-as-you-go or equity, I think, is going to be an important element of the approach. Based on the historical financial performance, we believe that the fund has capacity to issue some amount of additional debt under its current rate structure. Remember, you've got, in most every years, albeit variable, you do have cash flow in every years from operations and capital. So there is some capacity within the system to fund additional debt within the existing rate structure. How much debt is going to be a question, because over what period of time do you repay it? What's the interest rate? How might flows vary in the future? But at some level, the system certainly has capacity. Depending upon growth, the magnitude of those capital needs, additional revenues from rates and charges may be necessary to fund that capital program. And remember, what we're working towards is to try to give you sort of a comprehensive plan of finance, and we've got to begin to get the assumptions included about the size of the capital program, the projects, the timing, the true growth projections, those sorts of things, in order to give you a detailed plan of finance. And those are the things we're working towards with staff. Finally, given current estimates for projected flows, key consideration moving forward will be that treatment capacity and the costs associated with maintaining that capacity. I think, Brian, you were going to maybe pick up on some things that may complement some of this revolving loan fund applications, things of that nature.
Yeah, I'm just going to kind of update the board on where we're at right now and sort of why. And then we'll be coming back at you with some additional information. Now, to this point, what we've discussed, as you're aware of, is funding through the state's revolving fund under generally 20-year terms at about 1.82% to build a 2 MGD force main to Sanford. And I think the application at the time contemplated making improvements to our existing water plant or wastewater plant. Since that time, discussions with Sanford, we've kind of evolved that proposal somewhat to possibly look at some other options, which would include continuing the force main to Sanford, but repurposing our existing plant to become essentially what's called a headworks and grit removal and an equalization basin, and explore the possibilities of that. And then also to work with Chatham Park on a system that they're planning, which would initially treat 250,000 gallons per day, and I think then at some point upgrading from that as well, and then also providing reuse water for the town. So we've established that need for capacity for growth. How do we get there to actually how do we get to the point of actually realizing that growth and becoming operational? The first thing, given that we're currently exploring the Sanford force main, is we actually need agreement from the city of Sanford to actually accept our wastewater. So over the past couple of months, we've been staff, consultants, attorneys been in discussion with the City of Sanford on some basic terms that would allow the town to send its wastewater to Sanford. We engaged Davenport at a pretty early stage, and they prepared other work that I think we'll be discussing in upcoming meetings as we get closer to actually reviewing an agreement that will show how we kind of arrived at a rate that is acceptable for Sanford to treat the wastewater, but also a rate that's acceptable for Sanford that would allow us to reserve that 2 MGE capacity and pay off the debt that they incurred with building their oversized wastewater facility. So we're coming, I think, to the end of that process right now. We have a meeting with Sanford tomorrow to discuss their proposal. Got some questions on some of the feedback that they provided us, and we're looking forward to actually providing you with an overview of that agreement, along with some additional financial information that will hopefully show how we can fit in financially with that agreement. Before we can actually assume, I think, the lion's share of the debt for the actual construction, now keeping in mind that the Sanford agreement is just speaking to the actual delivery of the wastewater. It's not necessarily dealing with how we're paying for that delivery system. That's where an agreement with Chatham Park is going to be necessary. We've only really had some initial conversation with Chatham Park. We need to start that as we wind up with the Sanford agreement and have the basics of that in place. We need to start post haste, I think, with coming up with some terminology on how Chatham Park is going to help guarantee the debt that's going to be incurred, assuming that debt is incurred through revolving fund. And we've had some conversations and had some indications from Chatham Park on that. But the next step is going to be putting that in writing, because LGC is going to want to see how all of this comes into place. They want to see the intergovernmental agreement with Sanford. They want to see the developers agreement with Chatham Park, as well as some of the financial information that we'll be presenting, not only from what you saw here tonight, but also too, what kind of systemic costs that we're going to incur with providing this treatment system and evolution. And then finally, once we have LGC approval, then that's when the stage of financing actually takes place. Assuming it's the revolving fund, and the agreements on that would be before you. We would be executing those arrangements, letting bids, and then eventually construction, and then operation. And so I think the end date that we've contemplated with all this, and just sort of a beginning to end timeline, is I think some of the financial stuff that we've been working with would have us conceivably operational with the Sanford force main, as well as our existing system, providing everything in between fell into place, which would also be including some of the design work and cost approvals. Sometime around fiscal year 2020, I believe, Fred, is what we were, 2020 or 2021 at the 2020, I think, is financially is what we were dealing with. So from now today until operation, sometime in 2020. So that's kind of where we're at. As you can see right now, we're at the very beginning of it. The Sanford agreement itself is something that again we'll be having more discussions on tomorrow. Term-wise, I think we've got the actual rate of flow and a cost per rate of flow, I think, pretty well nailed down. I think we've got the cost of the capacity cost and debt repayment spread out over time, and that pretty much nailed down. I think the stage that we're currently at is actually selecting the design firm and working with the design firm. We've had interviews with two different design firms, Wooten and Dewberry, recently. I think the more we talk about this, it seems like sometimes you walk away from these meetings knowing less than when you went into it. But there's been some really interesting conversations about how technically and specifically we use that facility that we have here in town to our advantage, as well as use the opportunity, I think, to take advantage of Sanford's overbuilt capacity. But we're going to have to put together some cost estimates to make sure that not only the cost of sending the water to Sanford can be covered, which I think it can to this point, but also, too, making sure that we're covering the cost given the fact that we would be using our existing plant for probably or possibly headworks and equalization, as well as paying off existing debt on our existing plant, which we still owe. As you can see from Ted's presentation, we still owe a little bit. We think after all of that, and I think this is where the devil's going to be in the details. We think after all of that, the goal would be to come up with an actual rate to affected Pittsboro customers that would be at or less what they're currently paying now. That's the goal that we're shooting for, and certainly if it can't, we're going to offer some other options, sharpen our pencils, or look for other ways to see how we want to be in this business moving forward. So again, hopefully. This has been somewhat enlightening. Certainly, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, this would be a good time to do it. If not, I think at the next meeting we could very well have some additional information for you. If not, we'll definitely have an update at minimum of where we're sitting in terms of an agreement with Sanford. So with that, I'll tap out, and if Ted has any other comments that he has. Again, thank him and his staff for the work that he's put into it, and we have, again, additional presentation, I think, that we're looking forward to. Ted and I kind of describe it as the Super Bowl, and eventually getting, I think, you guys to the Super Bowl sort of decision over how we're going to actually go about making a decision on financing. So I think we're really looking forward to presenting a lot of that information as well. So with that, I will tap out.
Thank you. Questions by the board for Ted Cole? You've educated us very well.
Yes.
I took just enough accounting classes in college to be dangerous, and so I really appreciate the way in which you presented.
Good. I hope it should provide a good basis for what Brian described, is that projections going forward. What do the financials look like with a series of assumptions about flow, capital investment, this agreement with Sanford? We've got the basis for that, that when that agreement comes before you, to be able to give you good information with which to make some decisions.
The straight line projection you made from 2015 through 2035, was that the same straight line projection that had been presented in last year's utility? Was that line given to you?
No, I think we just looked at flows today, flows in 2035, and did the math to figure out what kind of growth you needed annually to get there. So I don't believe it was provided to us. We just solved for that with the flows that were given to us.
So the flow, right? I think you mentioned the flows came from the Rubin report.
That's right. Yes.
Oh, right. I didn't catch that.
So again, it's consistent, I think, with what we've seen for some time.
And the Rubin report was the basis for that utility briefing last summer?
I think so. Am I correct?
Yeah, it's also the engineering report.
Yes.
But I think maybe they took this information from, I think, the actual application for revolving fund. But I could be wrong. There's more of this in the actual engineering report as well. But that's when it starts getting technical.
Yeah, I'm seeing the difficulty of getting to 2020 with projected growth.
Further questions?
Commissioner Fiocco, can you elaborate on that?
Well, looking at these numbers where it suggests that growth in capacity by 2020, I think, projected flow is 1,300,000 gallons. Our plant can handle 750. If we add to that 250, and I think maybe proposed for Chatham Park, we're only at 1 million. And we can only fully, I think, utilize our plant if we're under construction. Is that correct, Fred? We can go up to 100% once we start construction of the
Sanford
project.
What's the first part of your question?
So right now we're restricted to 80% of our plant. The capacity of our plant is restricted to 80%.
Okay, you're thinking of the 80-90 rule?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And at some point we get to go to 90. I think it's when we start design of an alternate system.
That's right.
And we can go to 100% once we start construction of that system.
Right.
Okay. So I don't know how long the construction period is. Maybe it's a year. So in 2019, we can get full capacity of our plant of 750,000 gallons a day. We got 250,000 gallons. The next year we're 300,000 gallons short unless we come online in 2020, based just on these projections. So
if we're following a straight line, we have to have that 2 MGD available by 2020 or 2021.
Yeah.
So,
And this will be, Diener accepts this on paper knowing full well this isn't actually what's going to occur, which is it shows that you're planning properly for these projections, not that you would actually hit them on the date certain.
I'm just making, so I'm contributing to that observation,
right,
that there's difficulty here.
I'll add to that observation, though, that I think what I'm hearing is maybe some innovative design concepts, project design concepts that could dramatically change the function of our current plant and thus its capacity. I mean, if it's acting as a what do you call it, headworks?
Yeah.
then it would be rated differently.
Well, I think the idea being that it would do a couple of things. I mean, right now it does everything.
Yeah.
We'd actually, in a way, we'd be kind of reducing it to better serve the force main, to remove the grit, all of the solid objects before it actually went through the force main. Mm-hmm. And then also too to take in and store additional influent, that comes in, so that we can properly flow it through the system. It's not being. I think one of the options in the Wooten report had us actually almost taking a wrecking ball to the existing plant. That's, I don't think, advisable at the end of the day, because keeping the plant operational in some form would allow us to continue to maximize its use and the money we're currently paying on it, but also to keep that facility available for possible additional uses. As you know, we could then reconvert it back to a wastewater plant at some point in the future. I mean, it's the lowest hanging fruit there is, in a way. So, but I think coupling that with the facility that Chatham Park is planning, and we need to get into that at some upcoming meetings, and how that project and process would look. Between all of that, we have to hit some timelines at the right time. So,
well, I'll tell you, I think we're making one of the better investments towards this increasing capacity at our existing plant by doing this I&I project. The more rainwater we can keep out of our system, the more capacity we have at the plant.
The use of our reuse water is going to.
Exactly. So it's how much we discharge to the river is what we get, which is the basis for our restrictions.
I'll just add one more thing, that the original grant or loan application presumed or assumed that we would go to 1.249 at our wastewater plant before we did the concepts. That we found it was very challenging to go to 1.249, but the cost of that was assumed in the loan application, which let's just say it was $13 million. That's not exactly right. But if we do the plant reuse, redesign it for other purposes, that cost would presumably go down pretty significantly. So we'd have some money left over, of course, depending if the Sanford line cost is about what we figured. Let's just say that's flat. We'd have some extra funding that we either wouldn't have to borrow, or we could reuse it, presumably, for other I&I work, which verbally we were told, if you show the nexus of the I&I improvements in the wastewater plant reuse, and we could use those funds for more leaky sewer projects, which we know we have them out there, we just don't have them funded.
Yay, I like hearing that.
So that's an idea to utilize some more of this loan funds, what we save at the wastewater plant. We won't know that for sure until we finish the design and then we get the bids.
At what point can we get into a more detailed projection rather than the straight line from the Rubin report? Would that be after the small area plan?
I'm not sure I followed you.
At what point can we begin to make projections based on business and construction and projections of that?
Probably having more data points in the future. I mean, right now it's just a straight line because that's all you can do.
Well, yeah, I think, one, maybe to your point, is there's a 2020 projected flow. How do you get there? What is it year over year that gets you there in 2020? And that may be available in the Wooten report. They may have just, I don't know the answer to that question, but somewhere there is detail that should support the 5-year increments year by year, presumably. It may not exist, but I think you're asking, is it there year by year? Is it based on reality of what you're seeing in permitting activity, new construction, things like that?
That's what I was trying to say, is that, I think until you actually can see some performance and put some points on the graph, then your line is probably looking a little less straight and a lot more accurate. But right now, if we're projecting off into the future, all we have to go on is what we can anticipate from Chatham Park, and what we can anticipate in our current trends, and as well as the other development that we might have hanging out there. And yeah, it's just a matter of, at that point, literally drawing that slope. But as we start seeing how development actually occurs, then the line kind of becomes a little bit more accurate. But the idea with this is that we, much like the budgeting, that this straight line is more or less conservatively drawn. We're anticipating, probably, for lack of a better way to put it, worst case scenarios as far as development goes. In all likelihood, it's going to be something that looks a bit less than this.
Worst case scenarios in terms of stormwater management or
in terms of hitting these high marks. Because like we've said, I&I goes down. Maybe development doesn't occur as fast. Maybe we're using more reuse. Lower flow toilets, water conservation measures, different things that we're already working on start coming into place, and you're seeing that line, maybe start leaning down a little bit after a certain amount of time.
Okay. Certainly, it would appear to be front-loaded growth.
Yeah.
And what interplay is there, or could there be, between the additional elements phasing chapter and these kinds of projections?
Yeah, I don't know yet. It's just, I think if we get a better idea for phasing and how that might come in, maybe that adjusts the timeline a little bit. It's just speculative for me at this point. Again, we just kind of take, like I said, the highest number out there, and we just sort of try to plan around that, just like we would with a budget.
Any further questions from the board? All right. Board ready to move on to electric vehicles?
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Or is the board interested in a break?
Great.
Motion for break?
So moved. Second.
Moved by John Bonnet, seconded by Michael Fiocco to break for 5 minutes. Those in favor, please stand. Snacking is now complete, and I'll entertain a motion to resume the evening. Thank you for reconvening. So moved. Michael Fiocco moved, and John Bonnet seconded. Oh, I'm getting punchy here. John Bonnet has proposed, yes, we need to vote on it, don't we? Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. There we go. John asked that the electric vehicle charging infrastructure support project be added to the agenda tonight, tomorrow. And John, can you give us some direction on that?
Very, very simple. Duke Energy, for violations of the Federal Clean Air Act, the end settlement was that they've agreed to pay $1.5 million into projects that will clean the air, and electric vehicle charging infrastructure is the projects they settle on. The first round is going to go to municipalities, local governments, and nonprofits, and we have an opportunity to apply for up to $50,000, $5,000 per charging station. That will only cover kind of a slow charge. There's 3 levels of EV chargers. One is basically like plugging in your wall to your household circuit. I understand it's fairly slow, maybe 6 hours, 8 hours to charge your entire battery for your vehicle. But it's good for topping off. That's what the $5,000 will pay for. Level 2, I don't know the pricing on that equipment, but it's more expensive, and you can charge within 2 to 3 hours, I think. Level 3 is like a 20 to 30 minute charge. I should know those numbers because it was back in the ARRI Stimulus Act that I was familiar with that kind of stuff. But that information, I'm sure, is available to staff. I don't want to get into the weeds. I would suggest that there's a handful of locations I've identified, suggested that we might put some charging infrastructure. As Paul Horn has suggested, it ought to be places where people already want to go and gather and linger. Coffee shops, restaurants, Main Street, the Hillsborough Street area, because it takes some time to charge your vehicle, no matter what class of charger we choose to go with. If we go with the faster chargers, we would need to come up with the additional funds beyond the $5,000 per charging station. I also inquired whether or not we could speculatively propose some number of chargers at our as yet to be designed town hall, our brand new town hall. And the response was, we want to get these things in the ground as quick as possible. We want to see the benefit to the environment as quick as possible. But you can put in the application. You can put in an application even more than for $50,000 cap. Ask for whatever you want. Ask for whatever you think you could reasonably invest to improve EV charging infrastructure. You don't necessarily get it. You might not get anything, but presumably we'll get something.
John, I didn't read all this. I assume if we install one, we could move it at some time, right?
Could not move it. I don't believe you can move it. I don't believe you can. Most of it is in infrastructure. Most of it's concrete, post, electrical installation. I believe that's the case. I think the cost of the actual box is very small compared to the overall project cost. I don't believe there's any administration funds in here. I think it's just for the actual installation. And I don't know, of those few places, I guess my email didn't transmit, but I don't know, does anybody have that handy? I just brainstormed a few locations. The one that seems most compelling to me would be just outside the Pocket Park. Paul Horn's concern is that is not town controlled because it's DOT, the parking there, DOT right away. But we managed to negotiate our way through that for the bicycle repair stand and the handicap ramp, and I think that if we are serious about it, we can look into it. But
I'd imagine your object, but it doesn't actually take up a parking space or anything.
it does. You do sacrifice, because in order to reserve it for an EV, you need to reserve it for an EV.
So it's not on the sidewalk, it's actually on the street.
It's in front of the space. It's from that space, and then the car just pulls in there generally.
But a regular car, but a regular car can still park there.
No. Otherwise, when your EV comes,
You won't have to.
he or she can't necessarily charge. If the normal car is already there.
And what comes to mind is that car is going to occupy that space for some time to get the benefit of the station. It seems to me they shouldn't be the prime in and out spots that we think for downtown. They should probably be a little bit further removed.
Like the community house, perhaps?
Yeah. Yeah. Because clearly, someone's going to have to spend some time. They don't mind walking a block to get downtown or whatever they're doing.
So when a car charges, how much electricity, how much does it cost per car?
It's very insignificant. Really, it's pennies compared to a couple dollars per gallon of gasoline. It's
what it is, meter?
We would have to choose to meter, and we would have to install the meter, I believe. I think there are many installations that are not metered because it's so insignificant.
So Duke Power just...
Oh, no. I mean, we would pay what I'm suggesting is the town would pay for that electricity. Whether or not we would choose to meter it separately, I think it would increase the cost of the project, and I don't think that it's justified based on the amount of use that would be demanded.
So the cost of doing it's not so much that people are going to come, not to go their home, are going to come down and do it there instead, because it's not really that much for them either.
Correct. Yes, that's absolutely true. I don't think you see that kind of free riding. I think what we see is people using it because they own an EV vehicle. They're going to come and have coffee in our town because they own the EV vehicle. Yes. There's two at CCCC, and there's one in Chapel. Three? So September 1 is the deadline. I thought it was a letter of intent. It's actually an application. We could ask staff to do the due diligence on this and get back to us.
I'm in agreement with that.
At one level, it's free money. But if we choose to have more attractive charging services, then prices will have to be, bids will have to be got, and the town will need to pay additional above the $5,000 per charging station.
Install it. Do we do that or just do?
I don't know, but that's sometime down the road.
How does the board want to direct staff?
So I move that we ask staff to compile a list of 10 locations and get back to us with recommendation as to what it would cost for level 1, level 2, and level 3. That way we can have an array of choices as to how rigorous, how attractive we want these charging stations to be.
One thing, just reading this document, it does not list level 3.
That's right, it only pays for level 1. But I did confirm on the phone that we can direct that money for better chargers, we just have to pay the difference.
Because it does make mention of level 2.
Oh, it does?
Maybe either 1 or 2 installed locations designed to support the charging PEs.
Okay. There again, you know,
hours.
I didn't mean to get into the weeds too much, but I just wanted to share what I happen to know from prior study.
And 2 is more quicker.
Yeah, there aren't very many level 3 chargers in the world. There's many, many fewer of those than there are level 2 chargers. And I think
Maybe we could put a level 2 downtown.
Excuse me?
Maybe we could put a level 2 downtown.
But I want to let Mr. Grisbeck and his staff figure all that out. And we'll weigh in on dollar figures, maybe.
So John has made the motion to direct staff to take a look at 10 locations and recommendations regarding the 3 levels of financial investment for chargers. Is there a second to his motion?
Second.
Seconded by Bette Wilson Foley. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Thank you.
Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you for your work on that, John.
That was easy. Thank you.
Manager's update.
I consider this over.
Well, we have item number 3.
That's right.
Which is the ADA funding that the DOT
Oh, yes.
is telling us that there is $7.5 million in the Federal Transportation Alternatives Program funding, and will lapse at the end of the fiscal year, federal fiscal year. And I got this from Matthew Day, and I think, Jeff, you had it too. I mean, I guess you got it before I did, long before I did. Yeah. So I saw it, and it described a situation where the money could be put forth for projects improving accessibility, and that there was going to be priority put towards municipalities less than 5,000, so that put us in good standing. The fact that we have this downtown vision plan that identifies one particular intersection that I think is quite troubling for us could be, I think, a good candidate. The DOT, when they've been talking to us about making these improvements that we've identified in our downtown vision plan, have always talked about how the money comes from different pots, and that they're going to find it, some in this pot and some in that pot. And I think this is a perfect pot that they might say, hey, we can take from that pot to fulfill this obligation, or not obligation, but idea that has been identified in Pittsboro, that we've been talking to Pittsboro about, making improvements. And so I think it could be favorable. And I think it's an important intersection for us to try to make more accessible. So there is a boilerplate cover letter application that all we have to do is fill in some of the blanks. It is due, what is it, the end of this week? Yeah. So Matthew's basically handed us some tools to say, sign up. It's pretty easy to sign up. I'd like for us to take advantage of it and try to get a letter of interest. It's like I said, it's a boilerplate form. And we can just fill in our information, submit it, and see if we can get, I think including this material with our application would be great. All right, thanks. immediately identifying this work.
That's what you were considering. I didn't talk to you about it. I don't know. I
Yeah,
was
it's
guessing
perfect.
that that's
Yeah.
what you were.
Well, we're on the same page.
Scary.
Much needed.
We didn't hear that.
People with disabilities don't count.
That's an interesting conversation.
I said, good work, sir. This is the letter that you're talking
Yeah.
about?
Yep.
Right over
I
here.
think it is.
Are there other locations? The county has identified 2 on the intersection of Johnson Street, 4 at the Circle, and 12 at 15501 intersections.
Yeah.
I guess from Pittsboro Elementary all the way out to the 64 Business, which would include the one that we're talking about tonight. The county seems to think we should jump on all of them.
Okay.
That was the county suggestion.
Uh-huh.
Does it need to be intersections?
No.
Because I think that strip along, in front of the brewery, all that needs to be, that should be considered too.
Well, isn't it ADA compliant
Okay.
Yeah.
ramps? It's
Oh,
not
okay.
sidewalks.
I got you.
So these would be making ramps to sidewalks
I got you.
ADA compliant.
So I think that if you go back to that, here, this, let me go back to it. Cost, I think we're looking at $500,000. Yeah, because it includes a lot of this.
A lot of brickwork.
Yeah.
And they could come back and say, no, we want to spread this money out more. There's really just
Right.
concrete ramps with, the knobs at the.
I have no problem throwing everything in there and seeing what they say.
Yeah.
Well, this one is identified, in our vision plan as part of our conversations with the DOT for funding all $15 million of these improvements. So I think it gets extra weight on the DOT, so to speak. Again, we can talk to them and remind them of the different POTS conversations we've had many times. And it's the one that really does meet the criteria of this funding, very specifically.
Especially that southwest corner.
Yep.
It's really
It's really tough.
So what do you need, Michael? Motion or what?
Yeah. So I'll make a motion that we put an application, a letter of interest into the DOT regarding this intersection.
Second.
Moved by Michael Fielder, seconded by Pamela Baldwin. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
Mr. Grusbeck, you had indicated you had no objections to throwing it all in there.
Yeah,
Mr. Fiocco, do you have concerns about adding in West Street, I think you said?
Johnson Street, the county had identified 4 around the circle, and.
So the county, they are making the same application?
Well, they're asking the town to do it.
Oh, they're asking us to do it?
Yeah. As partners in TARPO, they passed along their evaluations of intersections.
Well, I think the ones around the courthouse are part of a bigger
That project.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, and that may be wasted money. We spend money and then tear it out.
Because we're going to be doing that with the truck.
But didn't you say there were others down West Street?
No, it would be from 15501 from Pittsboro Elementary School Road all the way out to 64. Essentially, is what the letter from Kara, the planner with the county, had indicated that was their thoughts on some intersections.
Could we describe it as what we'd really want, and
Well, prioritize.
additional.
We could potentially do this one that we talked about tonight as the first,
Right.
number one. And then if there was other ones, because I personally haven't evaluated like the Johnson Street one or anything like that, so I don't know what the impact there is.
Yeah. $7 million. That's why I guess I'm not opposed to just throwing everything in there. And seeing what happens.
Yeah. And there may be some.
Is there consensus for staff throwing it all in?
I would like to. The more money you can get it.
But I think it's important to prioritize because
Yeah,
it's shame for the others to get picked and
Oh,
this is different.
well, I think this intersection would, in my humble opinion, that intersection would take priority, but because it's the highest ticket, biggest ticket, it would have the most impact.
Well, can we put it in our form letter that, can we rank them and say that we're ranking them?
I guess, I don't know how the other ones rank above the top one, you know what I'm saying? Because who evaluated these other places and what was the ranking criteria for those? We know we want this one to be evaluated and potentially funded. These other ones, they're potential areas that need addressing. How to rank those, I'm not sure. And there may be others that Public Works knows about.
Well, there could be two rankings, the top priority and the rest.
Yeah.
We should include photographs with the application. Is that,
Yeah?
that real?
Yeah, we don't. It either scares somebody.
I don't think it's
Or-
just not from that.
What a model to attend to all.
It wouldn't be hard to wait until somebody was.
I'm sorry. Yeah, let's
That reminds me that on the southeast side
I can give the dummy.
of that intersection, there's been a patch of concrete.
Yes, I
laid,
saw them doing that.
painted
the other day.
yellow, and
Marvelous.
And Tommy Edwards said that intersection, he's watched more people fall at that particular location. And I think it's just wonderful that we now have a lump of concrete that has yellow paint on it. So.
Yeah, we had.
I think a lady fell there, if I'm not mistaken, and hurt herself.
We had an insurance claim. The claim was denied, but we went ahead and marked the. So I mean, you may be hearing from her, but I mean, we submitted it through our claims process, and they denied the claim, but we went ahead and marked it yellow anyway.
Seems like there's a rule of law that says that if you fix something later, it can't be used as against you for
This case is, it's clearly marked. I mean, we could go up and down the downtown and lose a lot of sleepless nights.
The neighborhood spoke about fixing the intersections. We got that new restaurant opening up. Maybe on this side.
Well, I think
There's a lot of interest in there.
that may be a while before.
Well, it'll be a lot while before we're successful too, so I'm just saying.
Now, can we move down to the manager's update?
Yeah, I'm going to be very brief. I'm spending negative time on this, other than to say, that I did send out an email which pointed out a couple of other things. One of which that we'll be accepting credit cards in the lobby. We won't be accepting them over the phone or through the drive-through just because of security reasons, and that's consistent with other communities. And then we're looking forward to having that on the web as well, but there's a little bit more work to do with our accounting software on that anyway. But at least we will have the ability to accept credit cards and debit cards in the lobby by around August 1st. So there's that. And then also to dioxane, I asked Adam to follow up with that, the dioxane 1.4 issue, and he indicates, based on some of the stuff he's heard from the state, that a lot of the focus, if it gets to the point of being regulated, will be focused on actual industrial pretreatment and at the point of discharge as opposed to raw water intake and treatment, if that makes any sense. So, so that's, I think, good news for us, I think, other than because if it gets to that point, then presumably we'll have less to deal with anyway. He continues to monitor it 2 times a month. Sometimes it shows up, sometimes it doesn't. It says there's just no rhyme or reason to it. So, and that's that. So Like I said, other comments I have are written down, including, also too, I guess I'll direct you to the, we were apparently awarded a grant of about $150,000 to do some asset inventory, basically implementing a GIS, or Geographic Information System, to map out a capital improvement plan for some of our faulty sanitary sewer pipes that need to be repaired, and that fits into our I&I strategy and reducing some of that inflow that we had talked about earlier. So, good news there, and we'll keep you informed on where we're at on that. So, with that, I'll tap out for the moment.
Commissioners' concerns, Jay?
No, ma'am,
Good. All these people have been traveling. You've been to the beach, and Pat's been to Tanzania or Tanzania. Some of the other. Michael?
My concern has to do with sewer allocation requests. Kind of thought there were going to be two of them on the agenda tonight. One was the Northwood High School, and there's another one that Chatham Park has submitted.
We haven't received any actual official allocation request, to be perfectly technical about that. But we have had discussions with them, and I think those issues are worked out, as we've discussed earlier. So
I have not understood.
You and I did.
When I've inquired as to whether or not an official request has been submitted.
Okay, we haven't received an official request from anyone.
Chatham Park was not aware of that fact.
Chatham Park did not submit an official request. Chatham Park gave us a schedule for when they would be asking for allocations. It was not a, can we have this allocation?
Okay.
In an official request. I can show you the letters.
No, I've got a copy of the letter. Okay. But they are telling me that
I've talked about it with them too. They know exactly what's going on. We will get back to them and invite them to actually submit an official request based on some of the modifications that we talked about that wouldn't actually outstrip our ability to provide them with capacity. Because what they were originally asking for, we did not have the ability to provide. So I went back to them and I said, come up with a better schedule that's scaled down. We've talked about all of this.
Okay. So now, let me finish. So when I talk with Chatham Park, and I say to them that the staff does not believe that they've received an official request from you, they say, we've never heard that. Okay. And so I am bringing up a situation that there's a different information going on, because I don't want us, obviously, to be playing favorites with who submits, because it's first come, first served basis. And what I understand is they are of the opinion that they put in a request in March. So
no.
Okay. So
read the letter.
You have not made an official request.
You want me to answer that?
I'm telling you, you've not made an official request.
This was the conversation that Tim and Bubba and I had at the meeting that, Chuck, you were also at.
And so is there a format that is anticipated to be an official request? Okay. And do we have a form for doing that kind of thing?
There's signed and sealed engineered report based off of state 2T rules. We have not received that on these projects.
You need the calculations to support the request.
That's what we've had since I've been here. Yeah.
Okay. And reread the letter. All it was a very simple table saying for this development on such and such a date, this amount of allocation, and that's all that was. That was not anything official. I don't know how to make that any more clear.
Well, I don't. It appears to me that the message never got back to them.
I think there's just miscommunication.
Huh?
There's just miscommunication. You're
okay.
saying that.
Well, that's what I think I'm hearing.
It wasn't miscommunication last week when I was talking with them.
So now?
Right.
Okay. That's the extent of my concern.
Okay. Pamela? John?
Yes. I'm understanding that Chatham Park's original PDD was for, 7,400 acres? excuse me? 7,100? Okay. And I'm hearing that the project that was reported in the paper is in the process of acquiring up to 8,500 altogether. So there's approximately 1,400 acres that have been acquired, and I think I understood from you, Mr. Jones, earlier, that it's your opinion that those projects, when they're proposed for development, will be under our UDO.
Whatever current town regulations are in place.
Okay.
Unless those parcels do some other type of zoning, like their own PDD.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what that might look like, but they are not part of Chatham Park PDD.
Mm-hmm.
That acreage that they've acquired outside of the master plan.
Okay. It seems odd. It seems, I guess I'm surprised by that. I assumed that they would use their existing permissions and approval authority, the privileges that they got through the PDD to expand their acreage.
Slow things down too much to try to add it.
Is that it?
They'd have to go back through the master plan approval process to add it.
Okay.
Start all these little clubs over here again.
Well,
okay.
Completely changes the master plan.
Okay.
They could.
But are we going to end up with a situation where, based on their stated and advertised goal of being exceptional, world-class, and sustainable, are we going to end up with two different flavors? I know that Mr. Jones wants to have a seamless transition between Pittsboro and Chatham Park, but
Of course, we have no way of knowing, but my guess is they would want it to appear to be part of Chatham Park. Unless they're going to do something completely different. Those, I think, bought some land other spots.
and that's Tim Smith, not Preston Development Corp., not CPI. Okay, well, I think I have a better understanding of it.
All right. For your information, we have letters from a couple of different people who are interested in the Citizens Advisory Committee, so take a look at that, and then Alice will send us whatever she receives in the meantime from other people. And pursuant to NCGS 143-318.11A5, is there a motion that we go into closed session to discuss the purchase of real estate?
So moved. Second.
Moved by Michael Fiocco, seconded by John Vaughn. Those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed. Motion carries unanimously. Good night, Jeff. Thank you.